Selectmen's meeting of August 6, 2019. It's a little early, it's 6 o'clock. Gardner, would you lead us in the pledge, please?
I pledge allegiance
To the flag
of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
All right, can we have the approval of the minutes of July 9th,
So moved.
Second, a comment though, Mr. Chairman?
please?
Mr. Chairman, brevity is the soul of wit, and these are very funny. I guess it was. But the question I have is, last meeting, we had a very lengthy discussion about a project downtown, of which there was a motion made that referenced a bunch of conditions on the motion that weren't in the original one. So I'm wondering, is the official motion and conditions noted someplace other than the minutes? If someone were to look a year from now at these minutes and say, what were the conditions, how would they know? How do we hold someone accountable to the conditions we put on a motion?
That's a good question, Mr. Trask, but the minutes need to have the motion, who made it, who seconded it, and what the vote was. That's all that's required.
But should it not, but if my
That's all that's
motion,
required.
so I'm asking
You could
whether,
ask the clerk.
through you to the clerk, the conditions that we placed, the motion was made, but is the motion recorded with the conditions, or how is it later known what conditions were placed on a motion?
The minutes should read what the motion was, as long as the motion that was made was the one that was voted and approved.
Can I offer some, I mean, in the, we're talking about the project on Maple Street?
Yes.
And
yes.
so the letter that was issued to the applicant is a public record, and if anybody were to read those minutes and want to know what those conditions were, the town would provide a copy of that letter, which is attainable through the Freedom of Information Act.
Okay, but it says on a motion by Selectman Trask, seconded by Selectman Langley, the board voted 5 to approve the application with minor modifications to the agreement. Doesn't specifically reference the letter, and there were a handful of things we modified and we talked about in things that weren't in the letter. So I'm just wondering how we record. Those are conditions. Those are conditions of approval, and I would expect that, you know, if one of the conditions that wasn't in the letter was protective screening to prevent climbing. If a year from now we wanted to say those aren't there, and I wanted to say, wait a second, that was a condition of the motion, how is that captured and recorded?
Yeah, the letter contains all of the actions, so the minutes certainly could be edited to reference the letter that was provided to the applicant based on the favorable vote. But I don't know that we would.
But we extended the letter. We had things that weren't in the letter.
But the letter that went out to the applicant contained all of the
Afterwards?
conditions that were discussed in.
Okay, so there was a letter that afterwards had all the conditions that we discussed and approved.
That's correct.
Okay. All right, then that's the question I was asking. Okay, thank you.
Any further discussion? All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? None? Thank you. So now's the time for new public business, and we have a room fill here. So I'm going to ask if somebody's here under new business that the lead person raise their hand and identify yourself. One at a time. Peter, thank you. The gentleman behind you? Richard Rowell. Anybody else? Jane Fuller.
Andrew Daly.
Time out. Andrea, are you with Jane or separate? I'm with Jane. So she's the lead speaker? Yes, she is. Thank you. Keith? Okay. Anybody else? Thank you. So I want to thank those people that are here tonight that gave me a heads up that you were coming. It's really appropriate to let the chair know you're coming here under new business, and I appreciate those people let me know. Peter, you have been in contact with me a number of times. I'd like you to go first, if you don't mind. Introduce yourself and then shoot from the hip.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Board. My name is Peter Kushneruk, Kushneruk. I reside at 3 Hanson Road, Danvers, Precinct 5. I've been there approximately 41 years, and the reason why I'm approaching now and talking to the Board of Selectmen is the fact that I have a problem with, let's put it succinctly, Elliott Street and Liberty Street, that intersection known as Route 62. I have been requesting a left-hand arrow in anybody traveling eastbound on Route 62 Elliott Street, Danvers, in the direction of Beverly. You have 3 lanes from Route 128 underpass, because you have to go under Route 128 in order to travel on Elliott Street. And you have 3 lanes, and you come up to a set of lights. Those lights are in abeyance to let traffic in the westbound route travel. That intersection is 5 lanes of highway, or 5 lanes of roadway on both sides of the light. You have 3 lanes westbound, meaning that you have a through lane and a right-hand turn lane going westbound from Beverly to Danvers. You have a center lane through lane, and you have a left lane taking left onto Liberty Street, which takes you down to the port, or the Port District, down to the Riverside School. Those of you might be familiar with it. On the eastbound side, you have 3 lanes. A right-hand lane to take you onto Liberty Street, going down to the Riverside School and the Danvers Port, a through lane, and on the left hand, or the middle of the highway, which is on the double lane, you have a through lane. There is no left-hand lane arrow. What I'm requesting is that there be a left-hand lane arrow. Now, let's back up a bit. I want to give you a little bit of my background and where I'm coming from. I'm currently retired. I'm a retired U.S. Army officer, captain, retired U.S.
Thank you for your service.
Artillery. I did 23 years. I was told, and it's been impressed upon me, that there is a mission, and the mission must be accomplished. All right? Then next is the care and the welfare of men. And with that, the premium thing to be concerned about the men is the safety. I am concerned about safety. Not having a left-hand arrow, there is a problem of safety here. And that's the reason why I'm here. If you're traveling through on the lights from Beverly, meaning westbound, into Danvers to 128, in that direction, you have a green arrow taking you to a left with a left-hand arrow allowing you to go left, and the green light allowing those 2 lanes to go through to Danvers. If you're traveling eastbound from Danvers into Beverly, you have a red light delayed, meaning that you cannot travel because you have to allow the left-hand lane from Beverly into Danvers to go down Liberty Street. So you can't cross their traffic lane. What happens is when the delayed arrow red stops, there's a red arrow on the left-hand lane to go down Liberty Street, so it stops the westbound traffic from traveling. Now you have a green arrow, meaning that if you're in the left-hand lane and you're trying to get into Liberty Street to go up into the neighborhood, you've got traffic coming lickety-split from Beverly with a through traffic green, so you're going against the traffic. And if you're sitting in that lane trying to take a left and the cars behind you are honking their horn because you've got your left directional on, they don't understand the fact that you can't get in there. Now, here's my dilemma. There are there are 89 establishments, living habitats up there. There are approximately between 89 families up to 105. I don't know the exact number because I haven't been in every house. But I've checked into it, and there are a number of people there. You have approximately, I would estimate, because nobody's really taken account at this point, over 500 traffic ins and outs on Liberty Street trying to get onto Route 62
Peter, I'm
going
sorry.
either way.
Peter, where are the homes, these people that you're
Okay,
talking about?
if you know the intersection,
Yeah,
Okay, you know where the nursing home is?
yes.
We're talking opposite side of 62 up into, going up to the hill where the water tower is. It is formerly known as the Orchard area. That would be bounded by Foster Street, which runs from the wall. We're now in a prison up there with the wall. But it runs from the wall all the way down to Elliott Street coming out at the farm. You know, the farm is just before you get to Danvers Port Yacht Club on the left-hand side?
Yes.
Okay, it's that section in there that runs into
Folly
the hill.
It's not Folly Hill.
That's not Folly Hill, no.
It's to this side of Kings Grant.
Yes. It's before the hill. So there are 89 establishments, houses up there, and people are trying to get in and out. So, you know, my idea is that there is safety a concern here, all right? It was recognized, as my wife pointed out, the safety problem with Spring Street from St. John's Prep. The St. John's Prep area has gotten attention. They've got a light in there now to help them get in and out, take care of safety and all the traffic problems up there. But if you come back to Liberty Street, all right, the Massachusetts DOT spent approximately $26+ million on 35 and 62, and they caused the greatest number of traffic accidents after the completion of that project than any other project that was done in the state of Massachusetts. All right, it came to the point where, I don't know, everybody got frustrated, including the Danvers Police Department. I have been talking to Mr. Henry, who is the chair of the Traffic Advisory Committee, and to paraphrase him, we have a right to disagree, and the feeling of the committee is that they don't want to disturb Massachusetts DOT and cause any problems because they want to cooperate with Beverly and PVD and everybody else in the traffic situation here. And they are not going to see a left-hand arrow taking place at Liberty Street. We were hoping that that would take place when they were doing the work on Danversport down there, where they had the problem with the breakdown of the culvert, and the state was going to do something with it. We were hoping they could put it in as far as a light. I talked with Mr. Henry at great lengths about a number of things. One of the points that I pointed out was there's no coordination on lights. There's no way of them doing anything with regards to alleviating it with lights. It's going to take a real big effort to correct that situation that we have at 62 and 35. If you're trying to get through there, I'd say from roughly 3 o'clock in the afternoon till 7 o'clock at night on either one, you're going to find out that you can't do that in the afternoon, and it's even worse in the morning. You've got runners out there. As soon as they hit that light, they throw everything off. The whole sequence is thrown out of kilter. And I go back to my days when I had left teaching and worked in industry for a bit. One of the jobs that I had was I was working for IBM in Cambridge, and I was part of the MIT team, and I was learning the data processing situation. I was working on language at the time, BTAM and QTAM, which is the predecessor for communications. And the big project that they had was working with the city of New York, taking from the Battery up to 150th Street. If you were to travel in an automobile at 30 miles an hour because of the taxi situation at that time, and you had no...
Peter, can you keep your comments to Elliott Street and Liberty Street,
All I
please?
ever said was, they figured it out, and they got it done so that traffic would flow well in Manhattan. That was in 1968. We're here in 2019, and they still can't get things straight as far as lights or coordinate anything. Where's the problem? That's what I want to know. And also, what are you going to do as far as the selectmen? I feel safety is the main concern here. And I really feel as though we're being shortchanged in that area we're being discriminated against. And I want to see something done, and I want to see the board do something, and maybe you should contact Lovely, Senator Lovely, and Representative Spiliotis, and have them get after Mass DOT to do something about taking care of that light in that situation. Because believe me, if somebody gets killed there, I'm going to really raise the devil because I don't want to see that happen. There's too many accidents, there's too many responses, and it's happening 24 hours a day. So I'd like to know what's going to take place.
They may comment?
You may.
Just, I think staff agrees with almost 95% of what you just said. I just want to comment quickly on the assertion that playing nice with the DOT or being concerned about Beverly factors into decisions that get made at DTAC. You know, we have the Danvers Police Department, we have traffic consulting engineers looking at data, looking at intersections and layouts. It's true that we do have to work with the DOT on changes that involve state roads, but it's not a, placating the DOT is not a determining factor in these things. I think that sort of the timeliness of the response you got is an issue, but in terms of how that intersection is approached, it's not as simple as saying we want to make a change on the fly to solve a problem without knowing what the impact is. So everything you just said is accurate, but I just want to be clear that the playing nicely with the DOT is not a concern of the towns in terms of addressing traffic-related issues on state roads.
One other point I want to make is that people in the neighborhood have now changed their traffic pattern to go down 35 or come in from the Danvers Port area up Liberty Street so they can go through a green light to get up into our neighborhood, which is known as, I said, the Orchard. But what we're finding is that the people are trying to rush and they jam the intersection there, and you can't get through. The lights change, and now you get gridlock taking place because we can't get through to get into the neighborhood. We're tying up the intersection, but the cars that are there have tied up the intersection because we can't get through. There's no grid work on the intersection to indicate that this is an area where they shouldn't have cars tying up the situation, and I want to see a little more enforcement. I've got people in Danvers that live in Danvers tell me that they are traveling now to go down over Endicott Street, by DeWillis in the old Sylvania, Mass General area, to go to Salem or Beverly, or they go up to 1A through the back roads over Conan Street to get onto, what is it, Elliott Street, I guess? No, not Elliott, Cabot Street. So they can go into Beverly that way to get to Salem. They don't even go on 35 and 62 because it's just frustrating, especially during rush hour.
Peter?
Yes.
That's okay. Mr. Henry, I don't know how he came across to you, but at our last DTAC meeting, the conversation was in order for us to change that intersection, we need to work with Massachusetts Department of Traffic, DOT. So that takes a little effort to get them out there to look at what we need to do, because any change we make at that intersection affects the entire corridor there underneath 128.
No, that shouldn't be our problem. I'm concerned about safety. I want to live.
No, I understand, but we can't just indiscriminately change that light. We need to work with DOT. So my suggestion is we have the town manager have Department of Public Works sit down and see if what kind of remediation we can do in that area.
I'll be happy to work with anybody.
And enforcement is a piece of it, because the people that block the blocks cause a lot of the problems. So that's an enforcement issue for the police. That's something that we can't do as selectmen, or we can't do as a traffic advisory committee. That's up to the police to enforce the rules of the road. So I think the town manager is aware of the issue, so we're going to see how we can work with DOT. Obviously, Senator Lovely and Billy Otis would be brought into that conversation to help mitigate things. Remember, it took Ted 20 years to get that intersection changed on 128. So I don't want to say be patient. We can't do it tomorrow, but we're all aware of your complaint, and there needs to be a resolution of some type to help the people in your neighborhood and have a safe environment out there. So thank you for coming. Thank you for voicing your concerns. And the Traffic Advisory Committee will continue to work on this in the near future.
Thank you.
Is that fine, Mr. Chair? Okay?
Thank you.
All right, thank you for your time. Keith, you want to go next? Oh, you're on the agenda? Thank you. Okay, great. Let's just knock that off. All right. Richard? Please introduce yourself.
Yeah, my name is Richard Rowell. I want to thank the board for taking the time to hear my proposal or ideas. I've lived on Water Street in Danvers since the 50s. I've been a commercial fisherman for over 40 years, and I've run my business out of the Liberty Marina in Danvers, a private marina. And I've been selling fish and lobsters to Cherry Street Fish Market forever. In Danvers, there are 10 to 12 full-time commercial fishermen that operate out of other towns. I know probably a lot of people in town don't realize that, and that's not counting their helpers that work for them. And they're using facilities in Beverly, Salem, and Marblehead to run their businesses. In Danvers, there are no facilities for commercial fishermen. Town wharfs, town docks, town parking, with any kind of hoists or winch to run these businesses. And I've run my business on my own. I'm completely out of the town specter of what I do. But at this time, the storage of my lobster gear, where I've been renting land in Danvers to store it, I've lost because the property's been sold. And I have 1,000 lobster traps, and they won't fit in Danversport where I live, in the yard. And I don't think it would be probably under the bylaws to do that anyways. But in Marblehead, Swampscott, and Nahant, just in those towns that I know of, the town provides areas for their fishermen to store their gear in the wintertime, whether it's on the town dump, a town beach, or municipal parking lots throughout the town. And it's been going on forever, and the fishermen pay a fee, and they usually have the gear out of there around the 1st of April. Different towns do it different ways. I know in Nahant, it's more of a kind of an out-of-the-way area, fenced off for them to use. In Marblehead, it's a little bit more, they have to have their stuff cleaned up and out of there, in the springtime. So I'm requesting the town, whether it's empty lots, pieces of property that you're not collecting any taxes on that are just sitting there, or the town dump, any municipal lots that are being plowed in the wintertime that nobody is parking in, and I can name several that are empty, to make them available to me for the storage of my lobster gear. I've never asked the town for anything, for any help for my business, and right now I'm kind of stuck with where to put these. So that's what I'm asking you to think about, or to look into, or anything questions that you have for me, I can answer tonight. I certainly will. But that's the situation I'm in with.
So, Richard, I think it's an interesting situation. Obviously, we're not aware of your business per se. We're certainly, most of us are probably aware of fishing that goes on in Gloucester and Marblehead for years, and you see traps and equipment on those docks. I don't know if you've talked to anybody at Town Hall about your situation, and I don't know that we can identify an empty lot or not. The town is taking an inventory of town-owned lots that are empty and what to do with them. There may be something like that, I don't know, but what department should he
Yeah.
check with?
Actually, I have Richard's phone number sitting on my desk. I know the River Committee discussed this issue at their last meeting. They had some concerns, sort of saying yes without any policy in place. It's a new, I'll call it a problem. It's not really a problem, but it's a new problem that we're looking at. And I think, I think we need to connect, and we probably need to sit down with Chris Sanborn. He had made a request that you consider coming to the August River Committee meeting to explain to that group sort of what the need is. We do have a lot of properties, and I think it's something we want to try to figure out.
I got on his agenda for the 15th, but like Mr. Sanborn said, I was on the River Committee for years. The River Committee actually has no power. I think the power rests with the town.
That's accurate, yeah,
Their
their position was
recommendations-
not, they were not making they only make recommendations.
Right.
So that wasn't, their recommendation was that we not consider this without a policy, is my understanding. And I think Chris said you should consider coming and speaking to them about this, whether it's that committee or Chris's staff, and I think we want to look at this, because it's, as I said, it's a new, this is a
I'll
novel
gladly
issue.
go to
that
the
we wanna-
meeting and explain to them. I don't think they understand.
Okay, fair enough.
The big picture here with this. And I really don't think they have a clue about commercial fishermen and what's going on in this town and where people are working out of. But I'll gladly go to that meeting. I know from what Chris Sanborn told me that the River Committee is dead set against it. Like, whether it's 7-0 or 9-0, they voted completely against it, so.
But again,
But
just
I'll gladly go and talk to them.
And it may not be, I think maybe we start with a conversation, but I think the concern was more saying yes to this request without thinking through what a policy might look like. Because when you say yes to the first one without proper vetting, are you saying yes to numbers 2, 3, 4, and 5? So I don't know that first of all, they don't have the authority to say no. But I think the concern was saying yes before you think through what it is. So again, your number's on my desk. I think we should connect and have a conversation. And we
Right,
can
I
take-
know they mentioned like a liability issue with it,
We-
or,
we could- yeah, we
you
can
know,
discuss
there's
that.
all kinds of questions there, but it is done, and it has been done for years in other places. So that's, I can explain, I'll gladly explain that to them.
Richard, it's unusual in the fact that you're asking us, but it's not an unusual request, given that it happens in other communities. And work with the town manager and the harbor master so that we can move forwards and resolve it for you.
Mr.
Okay?
Chairman?
Yes.
So I just, through you, I know we're not supposed to discuss this, but nobody's ever asked me to lobster before, so I'm a little confused, just so I can address this at the end of the meeting. So all your traps are in the water all summer, you need no storage from April 1st until,
Thanksgiving.
okay, so pretty much there's no need for anything during that time?
No,
Okay, thank you. So I can address it at the end.
Mr. Chairman, just a
Yes.
quick comment for context. What is the amount of space you currently rent? I don't know
if
what
I had to
1,000
estimate
lobster
the
traps
space,
that you got.
I'd say it's approximately 30 by 100 feet.
Okay, so 3,500 feet.
Right. And it's traps, rope, and buoys.
Yep.
And
Oh, I've
it's
seen
not
them.
dirty, it's clean. I keep my stuff pristine, so it's not like you have, any problems with, rats or anything like that.
No, it wasn't my concern. You drive through Beverly, you see people with winter storage. I had no way to conceptualize how many 1,000 traps was. Thank you.
Okay?
Okay. All right, thank you very much
No,
for
you're
your
welcome.
time.
Thanks for coming. Okay. Mrs. Fuller? Welcome. Please introduce yourself to the audience at home.
My name's Jane Fuller. I live at 30 Congress Avenue in Precinct 3. Thank you for giving me this opportunity. The issue that I wish to present to you is with regards to a memorandum, a covenant that was issued in 1984 by Danvers Board of Selectmen and Joseph DiLorenzo Sr., Danvers Port Marina LLC. This memorandum gave DEP the authority to issue a permit for a footbridge across Millet Creek. The provisions of the covenant were that the marina, in turn, would provide slips to the existing homes upriver, reason being that the neighbors' access to navigable waters would be blocked. Joseph DiLorenzo Sr. agreed, and this act became a state legislation recorded on January 7th, 1986. We, my husband Robert and I, purchased our home in 1997. At the closing, the previous owners told us we were eligible for free berthing. At the time, we had a 22-foot Century. All we needed to do was present ourselves to the DiLorenzos to get a slip. We did this. Our neighbor at the time, Nick Pecci, docked his 27-foot carver there as well. We kept our boat at DYC free of charge from spring 1998 until 2013, when we received a letter from the marina director, who was the director at the time, Elena Rico, informing us that they would no longer offer the complimentary slip. My husband and I requested a meeting with Dan DiLorenzo. I showed him the paperwork that Senator Lovely and Ted Speliotis' office pulled out of the town records, and he informed us that he would not flat out honor this agreement. So now we're requesting the Board of Selectmen and the Town Council to become involved to facilitate a resolution of this issue.
Thank you. And the town manager would like to meet with you to discuss the situation, and I'm willing to sit in as well. And-
Thursday.
Right, Thursday at 5:30. So this board doesn't take any action under new business.
I
But thank you for
understand.
bringing it to our attention, and we do want to work with you to help you resolve your problem.
I just have a question.
Yes.
I sent the 20-page PDF to you and the town manager, and did the rest of the board get that as well?
They would get it if it becomes an actionable item for discussion, which at this time it is not.
Okay. All right. Thank you for your time.
Okay, but I'm sure the town manager can share and answer questions for any individual member that may have them.
Okay.
Okay? Thank you for coming. See you Thursday night. Is that it for new business? All right, thank you all for coming. The board is requested to approve a date, time change on a previously approved one-day wine and malt liquor license from October 12th, 2019, 5:30 to 7, to Thursday, October 10th, 2019, 6 to 8, for the annual homecoming event at the Essex North Shore Agricultural and Technical School. Bonnie Carr, Director of Workforce Development. Is there somebody here to speak to that?
Mr. Chairman, I
Yes.
can speak to
Oh,
that issue.
please.
Bonnie Carr, who did appear before the board at an earlier meeting, and the board did grant one-day liquor licenses for activities that they are going to hold this fall at North Shore Fotech. She did indicate at the time to my office that the dates were semi-concrete, but there could be a change, and she did ultimately end up request a change in date. The letter, I asked her to write a letter to the board, which she has done, and my recommendation would be an approval by the board.
Well, certainly very reasonable. Thank you. Any questions, any member of the board?
I move we accept the change as presented.
Second.
Any discussion? Hearing none, all in favor? Aye. Opposed? Thank you. Thank you, Joe. The board is in receipt of an application for a Reason to Ride bike event, Coordinator Thomas DeFaso, on Sunday, September 8, 2019, set up and beginning at 6 a.m. Ride beginning at 8 a.m., starting and ending at 75 Sylvan Street. Is there somebody here to speak to this?
I don't know if there's anybody here about this, except in case. So
Good evening to the board, and thank you for listening to me. We're going to host our bicycle ride for cancer research that we've run for the last 12 years. I've presented to the council the routes and the times of the ride. I have been to the police department, hired a detail. I've been to the fire department and notified them we're going to do it. So I'm just here in front of you people, asking your permission to run it again.
Thank you. How many years have you run this?
This is a 12th year.
12th year. Thank you very much. And do you typically start setting up at 6 a.m.?
Pardon me?
Do you typically start setting up at 6 a.m.?
We typically start 6 a.m. in the morning. Actually, the day before, we're going to have the people will come in and put up the tents. They come in Saturday. We try to get going around 6. We don't make any noise till 7 o'clock. At 7 o'clock, we have to try the loudspeakers out because the first ride gets going at 8 o'clock in the morning. We try to be real good neighbors there. anybody that's come over, we invited them over for lunch, so, yeah, so, but we have to start 6:30, just to get the loudspeakers going, make sure everything's working.
But you won't use the loudspeakers till 7 a.m.?
7 a.m., right?
Thank you. Any questions, Bill? No. Gardner?
I noticed there's a couple of different routes. Why the different routes?
Well, we have a 5K walk.
Thank you.
So the loop that you people see is the 5K walk. The other route is out of Sylvan Street and it goes up into Wenham. So that's where we're in Danvers, basically from Sylvan Street and up into Wenham. And then the bikes go quite a bit further from there. And they also return that route. Everybody is back by 11:30-ish. All the routes rotate around and everybody tries, we try to get everybody back at 11:30 because that's when we start serving lunch.
Okay.
That was my only question. Thank you.
Ann?
So anybody can show up for lunch, is that what you're
Sure,
telling
you
us?
can show up for lunch.
So I'm not gonna do any exercise.
Well, yeah, and you know, the lunch is for the bike riders and the families of the bike riders.
I'll put my bike in the car, come over and let you see it. Thank you for doing this. Cancer's such a nasty disease.
I'm sorry.
And really appreciate the work you do to raise funds, so thank you so much.
Thank you very much. Yeah, we've raised right around $800,000 for cancer
Wow.
research in the 12 years we've
That's
been running it.
fantastic.
So next year, we hope we pop $1 million.
That's when I'll come. That's when I'll write it.
David, any questions?
Nothing, I'm sorry, I was not here
Good.
for the
Thank you.
discussion.
What's the will of the board?
Move is presented.
Second.
Any discussion? Hearing none, all in favor?
Aye.
Good luck with your event. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. I appreciate it.
Diane, was that reason to
The
rise?
Yes.
board is in receipt of an application for a first-time block party by event coordinator Sean Dory, 7 Salvatore Circle, Sunday, September 1, 2019, 12 to 8 p.m., blocking from 7 to 10 Salvatore Circle. Is everything in order, Mr. Chairman?
Mr. Chairman, the application is complete with the necessary approval from town departments.
Thank you. Are you Sean?
I am, thank you for.
Please introduce yourself to folks at home.
Absolutely, Sean Doherty, I live at 7 Salvatore Circle, and we noticed that there was an influx of children in our neighborhood the last couple of years.
That's
and
good.
it being a nice little figure-8 neighborhood where neighbors can access their driveway from many directions and still not have through traffic. We've been talking to the neighbors, and we think that this would be something nice for the neighborhood to do. This year, we're looking to do it on Labor Day, and who knows, moving forward. So it'll be activities for children, you know, barbecue, that type of thing.
So you know you can't have any games on the
moonbots
street?
I
Okay,
gotcha.
very good.
No, yeah, none.
Thank you. Diane?
I'm not going. You don't have enough to do, Sean? You needed to run something else? You...
No, rec department, baseball, soccer, yeah, I gotta keep busy. Keeps
Well,
me out
as
of
you
jail,
know,
I
yeah,
guess.
you got hit by Facebook in the last couple of weeks, which is the nasty place, as I call it.
Yeah, yeah.
So thank you for picking up, your teams for picking up all the bottles and stuff
I
at the
appreciate it.
Try.
Trash bags in my
I
car
happen
at
to
all
know
times.
you do, and that a lot of the coaches do, so thank
Thank you
you.
very much, appreciate that.
The same before we go to the cable thing, which is next.
Okay. Gardner?
I have no questions. Good luck.
Bill?
Once again, as a former student, I'm very proud of what you're doing.
Appreciate that, Bill.
This former stomping ground of mine, I'm glad you picked out a location that's not going to interfere with any through traffic to any of your neighbors who want to get in and out. They still can go in there. It's thoughtful planning. I wish you a lot of luck. It's great to see the demographics of this neighborhood turn over, just as you've mentioned. A lot of young families going in there now as the older people are no longer with us that had their houses back in the 50s.
And anybody whose property abuts Robert Road are more than welcome to walk down the hill.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
What's the will of the board?
Move we
as
accept the app.
presented.
Go ahead, please. I'll second.
Any discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? None. Thank you. Good luck.
Thank you, appreciate
Hope
it.
you have good weather.
Thank you, appreciate that.
So I have a request from Selectman Trask to take number 12 out of order. If nobody objects, we'll go to number 12. The board will vote to accept gifts from Walmart to the Danvers Fire and Police Department for fire prevention and the DARE program in accordance with Mass General Laws, Chapter 44, Section 53A. Mr. Town Manager, can you speak to these?
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chairman. two generous gifts from Walmart to support both of the public safety agencies in town. As you mentioned, $1,000 for the fire prevention program and $1,000 for the DARE program. Both of these donations need to be accepted by the Board of Selectmen before they can be utilized to support those programs.
Good, very nice. Bill?
No questions, thank you.
Gardner?
No questions. I didn't know if there was going to be anybody here.
Diane?
Nope.
David?
No, thank you.
What's the will of the board?
And will we accept the gifts as presented with the appropriate letters of thanks?
Second.
Any discussion? Hearing none, all in favor?
Aye.
Aye,
Aye.
opposed, none, thank you. Thank you, Gardner.
Thank you.
All right. The board is requested to vote to renew the Verizon cable license for a term of 5 years. Somebody here to speak to that, Mr. Town Manager, or are you
Yeah,
doing
I'll
that?
introduce, Assistant Town Manager Jen Breaker will make her way to the microphone, and I'll fill the time, noting that you received a cover memorandum from Jen explaining the process as well as the outcome, which Jen and the Cable Advisory Committee feel is favorable. And I'll let Jen walk through some of the highlights from the renewal license that the committee worked on this year.
Welcome, Jen. Thank you.
Thank you.
Please introduce yourself for the folks at home.
Jen Breaker, I'm the Assistant Town Manager. We also have John Harrington from Verizon in the audience, and Greg Dolan from DCAT, and a number of DCAT board members here as well. As outlined in the memo that we provided to the board, we've negotiated a 5-year license renewal with Verizon for the cable license. Previously, we had a 10-year license. We feel the 5-year license provides the town with the ability to closer align the two cable contracts while keeping it a short enough period that if technology changes, we can change the contract in 5 years to accommodate the technology changes. Majority of the contract is exactly the same as before. This contract does allow for $21,000 per year of the contract for capital grants. So it's roughly $250,000 over the course of the contract. It also allows for 3% of the gross annual revenue of Comcast if we do get, of Verizon. If we do get Comcast to agree to a higher amount, Verizon will match that at the time. And it does provide 3 standard PEG access channels and 1 HD channel if the town requests within 270 days of the request. And we're happy to answer any questions you may have.
Thank you. David, you want to start?
Jen, I'm sorry, I didn't read your backup material. Is Verizon going to be taking over responsibility for our cable, the television studio?
No, the studio remains with DCAT. This just provides for funding for the studio.
Okay, and is this, Verizon has a parallel service to Comcast as far as television and internet in the town? No.
Parallel in what way? Would you?
Well, I'm sorry that I don't understand what this,
Sorry.
what this is for.
This renews their license to operate and provide cable services in the town of Danvers.
Oh, okay, all right, I get it now, thank you.
You're welcome.
All set, David?
Thank you, Dan.
Bill?
I have one concern that I'm hearing a lot of public relations, public information this week especially about the FCC changing regulations and taking away the controls or checks that the local governments and state governments have. What impact will that have on this agreement? Do you have any idea, Jen?
I do. We don't anticipate much impact on this agreement. That ruling just came down on August 1st. Our attorney has done a quick summary. He's working on a more extensive summary. They can allocate some services as in-kind services. Right now, and I'm just reviewing, I want to make sure I am in the right section. Some of those things can be like Verizon-owned iNets, which is a good example. However, the town of Danvers recently just put in their own iNet, so that wouldn't affect us. Some of the other things are costs of maintaining the transport lines from the studio to the hubs. I believe our iNet kind of resolves that issue as well.
And a lot of these items, they would have to notify us, and we would have a 128-day negotiation period. They couldn't just implement them without our negotiating with Verizon.
Okay, that item was a specific thing that I know we had negotiated many years ago that it was state of the art at the time, but we've taken and replaced it with our own system.
That is
more
correct.
recently. My concern is that the DCAT may have a total loss of revenue under some interpretations of this new decision, and I'm just worried that we haven't negotiated that away, because in essence, there's a very good chance that there may not be any funds coming from either Comcast or Verizon, theoretically, potentially, if this decision is carried forth by the federal government the way the FCC wants to do it.
And Bill, if I could add onto what Jen said, we had some communication today with the attorney. There are some unanswered questions in that August 1st decision. I think most importantly is whether cable providers are able to value the public access channels the way that they would value other commercial channels, and then turn around and claim those as in-kind services, which would essentially erode the revenue going to DCAT. So that's a major concern. The reality is the renewal that we just negotiated is way outside of the scope of those concerns. We need to renew this license. If it comes to the point where, and frankly, the cable providers will sort of determine whether that's a road they want to go down, and then we'll have a period of time where we can negotiate and try to amend the contract to prevent that. But there was likely a legislative sort of effort if it does get to that point. So it's a concern. It could have an impact, but it's outside of the scope of what we're looking at tonight, which is to extend the current contract on the best terms that we can negotiate for the.
Now, the other thing is, in the past, we've had two, maybe three 10-year contracts with the providers, and this is trying to bring the Verizon contract in line with the Comcast, so they both would be renewed at the same time in the future.
The hope is to get us there in the future. This doesn't do it perfectly, but our attorney is also reaching out to Comcast to see if they might be willing to start negotiations earlier, which would also help with that alignment. But we also feel that the 5-year contract is beneficial for us because it allows us to stay current and not have to wait the 10-year period to negotiate some items.
Thank you very much.
But I want to reiterate something Jen said, which is that the new license includes language that says that if the town is able to negotiate more favorable terms with Comcast, then Verizon has to match those. That was the main reason we were trying to align the two agreements, was that you end up negotiating one, and then when you try to negotiate the next, they point to the one you just negotiated and said, well, they don't have to do that. So having that language in now gives us the ability to have that conversation with the other provider outside of the expiration of the agreement. So we would still like to align the two terms, but we've accomplished the main goal with that language.
Thank you.
All set? Yep. Diane?
Thank you. As the liaison to the Cable Committee, just what the town manager just said, that this committee spent a lot of time with DCAT, Coley Rybicki, with the legal, our legal department, in getting it just to what he said, trying to make it so that trying to eliminate that competition. And I really want to thank everybody on the committee. DCAT came in and we really worked the equipment that was needed across this town in different departments. Jen did a great job. Coley, I think he became an expert on cable, but he did a great job chairing us. So I really appreciate the work that was done. And I think you did a great job. Thank you.
Thank you, Diane. Gardner?
Bill brought up the FCC legislation that the MMA was opposed to, and I was on one of their policy committees, and they explained some of the concerns they had, but still passed. And also the questions of parity and co-term have come up, so I think all my questions are answered. Thank you.
Thank you. So, Jen, what's the likelihood of Danvers entering into the cable business and have a municipal cable company of our own? And ask
Zero.
Verizon, zero.
Zero.
Sorry to hear that.
Thank you.
High-speed internet's a different question.
All right,
We'll
that's
talk about
right.
that one at a future date, but.
We've got those wires up.
All right, thank you, Jen, for your efforts, and those folks that worked on this with the committee. Thank you very much.
Mr.
What-
Chairman, I would just say the Cable Committee deserves a big thank you.
No,
They
no,
all worked
I
very
think they
hard
do.
on
Yep,
this.
no, I'm thinking, you didn't mention them all by name, so I can't repeat them. Why don't you introduce everybody, please?
I don't believe our cable committee is here
Okay.
this evening. We mentioned it would be a quick item. I will do a shameless plug for the cable committee.
Please.
We're a committee of 9 that is dwindling in membership. I believe we're down to 3 or 4 members right now. So if there's anybody out there that is interested in cable, and Danvers cable specifically, or DCAT, we'd be more than happy to have you join our committee.
Great, thank you.
Thank you very
Mr. Chairman?
much.
Yes.
Who the executive director from DCAT would like to.
Oh, sure, please go up there and,
Thanks.
Can I just say, he walked into this, what were you, 2 weeks into the job?
I think I actually went to my first cable committee meeting before I started.
Greg, introduce
which was
yourself,
a good
please.
way to make sure I
Greg,
wanted to
introduce
stay
yourself,
here.
please.
And what a
Yes,
great
sorry, Greg Dolan.
budget he brought forward in that amount of time, so he should be commended for that.
Thank you. So Greg Dolan, I'm the executive director of DCAT. I just wanted to walk back a little bit and talk about the process, because we worked extensively with the cable committee and the town manager's office to develop a cable business plan going forward. And the result of that plan, to meet all of what the town and the cable committee had wanted in coordination with DCAT, would have required a 4% franchise fee to fully fund that. So we understand that the negotiation can be difficult, especially when they're not aligned, but I just want to talk a little bit about what 3% looks like for us. Because 3% at this point, with the cable environment the way it is, isn't really status quo. It ends up being a likely decrease in funding to us, and we do have concerns going forward that it'll affect our ability to provide our current service level to the town. So, as you know, DCAT is primarily funded through cable franchise fees. So for the last 10 years, and as far as I know, as long as cable's been here, it's been a 3% fee. Verizon represents 42% of the cable revenue in Danvers. The other 58% is Comcast. So what that means for us is about, last year was $172,000 a year from Verizon. But walking back a few years, the year before that it was $180,000, and the year before that it was $184,800. So in the last 3 years, we've seen a 6.76% decrease in revenue from Verizon under the 3% license agreement that we've been working under. So going forward, I think it's safe to say that that revenue number will continue to decline. And with our fixed costs going up, as they do in every business, we have concerns that at some point something's going to have to give in one of these 5 years of the contract if there's not an increase. So the other piece is that what does 3% to 4% mean for your average cable subscriber? Roughly, it means about 40 cents more per month on their cable bill. So I think sometimes it's important to take a step back when you're talking about percentages and sort of convert it to real dollars and what we're talking about. And I know that in this process, the cable committee especially really worked with us to try to balance cable subscriber fees and service levels to the town, where we didn't want to, shoot for the moon to shoot for the moon. We wanted to make sure we were providing the highest quality services to the town of Danvers at a reasonable price. And we're hoping that 4% would get us there. And we're hoping that in the future, when we negotiate with Comcast, we can push hard to get that percentage to go up. Because I do think that if we are unable to, we're going to be facing a revenue decline. That's really the big pieces of it, but there were a few questions that we had, and I'm not sure if we know the answer to some of these. I know in the new contract that advertising and home shopping were included. We were curious if there was a sense of how much that would be, what the difference would be. There's also the possibility of an audit for Verizon, which is something that our board has been interested in doing in the past. We're hoping to revisit that going forward.
Greg, I'm sorry, would you say that again, please?
Sure. There's an opportunity to audit Verizon to make sure that they're accounting for the revenue. And I know our board in the past has expressed that we would be willing to pay the cost of doing that if the town were so interested. And then the last question I had was about the HD channel. I think with the 9-month lead time to that, it would be worth having that discussion sooner rather than later. I know we would be excited about that opportunity, and we'd also be concerned about the FCC portion of it, that if we ask for it, if the town asks for it, would they be able to walk it back?
Greg, I'm sorry, and what is that should, the HC?
The high definition channel. So we currently, all of our channels are in standard definition, so high definition is just a higher quality channel. It's probably typically what you would be watching at home on your TV. We have 3 channels in the standard definition tier, and to get one in the HD tier, we would have to request formally. The selectmen would formally have to request Verizon for it.
Mr. Chairman, I'm not sure the cable committee has heard these questions, and typically those would flow through the cable committee and then come from the cable committee to the Board of Selectmen. So my suggestion would be, we'll have to get our dwindling committee back to the table. I know they're catching their breath now, having completed this process, but this sounds like a good subject for an agenda there, and then we can report back in terms of what the recommendation would be.
All right, Greg, thank you.
Thank you.
So the board is requested to vote to renew the Verizon cable license for a term of 5 years. Is there a motion?
I move that we accept the application as presented.
Second.
Is there a second?
Yes, second.
Discussion? So we're voting to renew the Verizon cable license. All those in favor? Aye. Opposed? None? Thank you. Thank you, Jen, for your work and for the board. The board is requested to vote to take by eminent domain the fee simple of the following roadways laid out by the board on April 2nd, 2019, accepted as townways under Article 17 of the May 20, 2019 annual town meeting and as authorized by town meeting to acquire said fee in the ways Ardmore Drive, Arthur Street, Bayview Ave, Central Ave, and Laurel Street. And I assume somebody is here to speak to that on behalf of the
We have
town?
Town Engineer Stephen King here to speak to that.
Evening, Stephen.
Good evening, Board.
Please introduce yourself for the folks at home.
Steve King, Town Engineer, Town of Danvers. Tonight, presenting the order of the taking of the fee away for the streets Ardmore Drive, Arthur Street, Bayview Avenue, Central Avenue, and Laurel Street. This is the last step in the process of accepting a street formally as a public way. We've already had our public hearing back in March to lay out the streets. We, at town meeting, got the approval for the Board of Selectmen to take by eminent domain the streets. And the last step is to do the order of taking, which I'll then take it to the Registry of Deeds to record, and at that point, we'll have the streets public ways in town. This is roughly gonna add up another mile of roadways, public roadways in the town, which is then transferred over to our Chapter 90 funds for the next upcoming year.
Thank you. Diane?
I'm all set, thank you.
David?
Thank you, Dan. Stephen, now, the benefit to the town is hoped for increase in chapter, whatever it is, funds from the state.
It will increase.
Yeah, and so
Funds.
the town pays nothing in damages with respect to these takings.
I will. I have it
The
right.
only thing we pay is the recording fees at the Registry of Deeds.
Okay, and so,
That's it.
okay. Interesting. I was driving down Central Avenue for 60 years, and I never knew that it wasn't ours. So glad you're finally doing something about that. Okay, thank you, Dan.
Thank you, David. Bill?
Is there any actual land that we're taking by eminent domain in this process? These are all, many of them, long-time streets, as David has mentioned.
All your normal typical roadway layouts, not actual land.
It's on our land.
This is now our public roadways. I'm not
What I'm saying is, what I'm asking, is there any actual property being taken by eminent domain by the town in order to create these streets?
Just the original layout, but not specifically land. If that's
Is your question, Bill, are we encroaching into someone's property by taking these streets?
Yeah, I'm asking,
Yeah.
are
Oh,
we
okay.
taking actual physical land from any people who live on these streets in
No.
order to create these streets?
Not these layouts, nope.
Thank you.
What's that, Gardner?
I'm all set.
What's the will of the board?
Mr. Chairman, I move that the Board of Selectmen take by eminent domain the fee simple of the following roadways laid out by the Board of Selectmen on April 2nd, 2019, accepted as town ways under Article 17 of the May 20th, 2019 annual town meeting, and as authorized by the town meeting to acquire said fee in the ways Ardmore Drive, Arthur Street, Bayview Avenue, Central Avenue, Laurel Street, said taking of each fee in the way as being more particularly described in the respective order of taking to be executed by the Board of Selectmen this date.
Is there a second?
Second.
Discussion? Hearing none, all in favor?
Aye.
Aye, opposed? None, thank you.
Thanks.
Before we move on, Keith, you said you were on the agenda? What is the item? Oh, okay, thank you. We're going to get to you, thank you. The board will hear a report on the status of the Drought Management Act grant.
Mr. Chairman, I may the agenda item that we're about to start may be a bit longer than
Thank
the
you.
poll acceptances, so we may want to consider taking those out of order. We
Be
can
happy
keep
to
on as
do
well.
that. That's where I was kind of figuring we were going here.
Sorry, Stephen. We'll get you back up there. Man.
All right, so we'll go to number 9.
So we have Clint Allen and Kelly Kabrinsky from the, Kelly Kabursky, I'm sorry, you're not a Kabrinsky, from the electric department here tonight, and Kelly will explain what it is that we're requesting.
Kelly and who else?
Clint Allen in the audience,
Clint.
I'm sorry.
Where's Clint? Thank you. A public hearing will be held on the Danvers Electric and Verizon petition number 201-80927 dated September 27, 2018, requesting permission to locate poles, wires, cable fixtures, including the necessary anchors, guys, and other such sustaining and protecting fixtures to be owned and used in common by petitioners along and across the following public ways. Relocation of pole. Well, you're going to tell us what you're going to do, so I'm not going to read this. Thank you.
My name's Kelly Kabrensky. I'm a systems engineer for Danvers Electric.
Welcome.
We are requesting a grant of location for the relocation of 2 poles on Putnam Lane. One of the poles will serve the new subdivision, it's Isle of Skye Estates. And then the second pole that's being relocated is just to make up the distance between poles.
Okay, that's it. Questions? Gardner?
You mentioned 2 poles, but our diagram indicates a 3rd pole, new pole. Install a new pole at 116-4, install a new pole at 116-3.
Okay, I apologize. There is actually a 3rd pole on Dayton
Dayton
Street.
Street.
There
Yeah.
was a pole in private property that had to be relocated, and it served as a guy stub pole for one of the mainline poles. So that one is also being relocated. So 1 on Dayton Street, 2 on Putnam Lane.
Oh, okay, and actually, it mentions it in the narrative of the minutes. Thank you.
Yeah, sorry about that.
All set, Gardner?
I am.
Bill?
Kelly, I got a question. Are any of these poles requiring additional guy lines or guy poles that go onto private property?
Not on private property. The pole on Dayton Street will need a back guy, but it will be in the public way.
Because I've been a little concerned that the town has been placing guy wires on private property without notification of the owners and without having it come before our board. I only am saying that because some of the poles that were relocated on Hobart Street fell on property that was not owned by the town, and I'm a little concerned that they're going ahead with this. I had a house many years ago in Glendale that I never knew had a attachment to the deed until I went to sell it, and it was something that the town had put there in 1956, and I just didn't know about it. So
We would never intentionally set anything on private property without getting an easement from the landowner. Perhaps it was a replacement. And replacement or not, we should have approached the homeowner and made sure we had an easement for that. So we would never do that intentionally.
I would never use the word never, okay? Because
Well, we would-
I have an example I can give you later out of the meeting that was done. Thank you.
Okay, stay there. Diane?
I'm all set, thank you.
David?
I think that it's already been said, none of these poles are on private property. It's all
Correct.
public land.
That's correct.
Thank you.
Okay, this is a public hearing. Anyone in the public with any questions? Yes, sir. Please go to the microphone and introduce yourself.
Hank Farrell, 7 Putnam Lane. My house is directly across from one of these poles, my property. The wires being run to the subdivision, Isle of Skye Estate, are being run underground. I don't understand why the poles need to be moved when the wires could be run underground from where the pole is now. And the pole that's going to be moved, according to them, is 40 feet. I paced it off, it's 30. 40 feet would put it closer to the road, plus or minus. But there's also a tree right on the edge of the road there that's at least 12 inches in diameter. I imagine that's going to have to be cut down, and it would be a shame. And are we paying for this? Is this something that's being done to accommodate the subdivision that was put in, or what is the purpose as far as that goes, as far as accommodating the development?
the developer himself has not been exactly forthcoming, and there's been many problems at the site with runoff and other issues that don't apply to the telephone pole directly, but those are some of my concerns.
Thank you. Kelly, can you answer some of those questions?
So we looked at leaving the existing pole where it was, and the length of the underground was just a little bit too long, so it would be probably, I'm guessing, this is actually not my project, so I'm covering a coworker, but I think it'd be about 15 feet from the pole and then around the bend. There's some drainage issues there, so typically we like to place the pole at the end of an intersection for the riser. If we chose to leave the pole where it was, we would need to petition for conduit. We would need to put in an extra piece of underground equipment, and it would make the cable pole a little bit longer. With that being said, this is typical. We look at locating a pole at the intersection if we can. As far as, it's all billable work, so the developer will be billed the labor and material for it. As far as tree trimming, these poles, I believe they're in line with the existing pole line, so I'm not sure. Unfortunately, I can't answer on that right now, but I think somebody from the division could definitely meet you outside the property and we could review it.
Is that all acceptable, sir?
Yes, the tree is right exactly where you would probably want to put the telephone pole.
So she'll have somebody meet with you and they'll look at it. Okay, thank you. Anyone else?
Just a follow-up question, Mr. Chairman. The one on Dayton Street, moving off of private property onto public property, you aren't charging the homeowner for extending that another 80 feet, are you?
No, actually, in this case, this one, no, because the pole was on the property that was being developed.
Right.
Subdivision property.
Okay. Thank you.
Okay, this public hearing, motion to close, please.
Move to close the public hearing?
Is there a second?
Second?
All in favor? Aye.
Aye.
Thank you. What's the will of the board?
I move we accept the layout as presented.
Second?
Discussion? Hearing none, all in favor? Aye. Opposed? None, thank you. Are you up next, Kelly?
Actually, I believe Verizon's going to be.
Verizon is okay. So number 10, a public hearing will be held on the Danvers Electric Division and Verizon petition, number 1A3L9DP, dated June 13, 2019, requesting permission to locate poles, wires, cable fixtures, including necessary anchors, guys, other such sustain and protecting fixtures to be owned and used in common by petitioners along and across the following public ways or ways. And Keith, is this you? Thank you. I'll let you tell us what you're going to do, please. Please introduce yourself.
Yep, my name is Keith Malore. I'm section manager at Scient. We're a contracted vendor for Verizon. So I actually, to be totally forthcoming, I kind of stepped into this position after this was already kind of has been discussed, so I'm kind of walking into it a little bit blind. But from what I took from it and after the discussions I had, we have a pole on Water Street on the sidewalk. It just needs to be, in order to support the existing pole line that's present, it needs to be moved 6 feet south towards Endicott Street on the sidewalk, which is a further span of than 3 feet, which would anything, I guess, further than more than 3 feet would require approval from the board. So instead of 3 feet, it just has to be moved 6 feet to support the existing line.
Okay, thank you. Diane?
Are you moving 2 poles to 1 pole? Or are you moving 1 pole to 1 pole?
Just the one.
So from 82 water to 78?
No, it's just going to be that existing pole that's going to remain. The one in front of 82 water is going to remain.
Okay.
The one in front of 72/74 water is going to remain.
Okay.
The one in front of 76/78 is going to be moved.
Is this the one we're talking about, 6 feet?
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm good. Thank you.
David?
Nothing, thank you.
Bill?
Nothing.
Gardner?
One of the things that's helpful in the last presentation was we could see the plot with the driveways. We don't have that here. I'm presuming is obviously it isn't blocking a driveway or encroaching on a driveway, but in the future, I mean, if you're putting it on the edge and someone has to get around it or is blocked by the movement, you know, their line of sight getting out of their home, it's difficult to envision. You know, I'm trying to pull it up on Google Maps, but they don't delineate driveways either. So, I mean, I'm going to presume that you've looked at the current driveway locations, and nothing's going to impede people in a route.
It should not, no.
You want to put that, a motion?
Excuse me.
We'll get to it?
Sure.
Thank you.
Dan, may I
Yes.
just ask, was the owner of 78 Water Street notified of this public hearing? Does anybody know?
I don't believe so.
Yes. Mr. Chairman, I
Please,
can speak to
please.
that. There is a requirement of a direct abutter notification on both of these pole location permits that were.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Dan.
Thank you. This public hearing, anyone in the public? Can we have a motion?
Chairman, I move we accept the.
No, close the public
Oh,
hearing.
I'm sorry.
please.
I move we close the public hearing. Thank you.
Second.
Discussion? All in favor?
Right.
Aye. Opposed? None. Thank you. What's the will of the board?
I move we accept the presentation, the application as presented, with the condition that it does not block the driveway after the move.
Thank you. Is there a second?
Well, wait a minute. We've added to the application and what is considered blocking a driveway on Water Street. Can't we just accept it? It's, the abutters have been notified. I don't support the additional language.
Fine. I asked the question. The chairman asked if I want to
Yep, nope, I
add as
just,
a condition.
butters
I
were
can go
notified.
without it. I can go
yeah,
without the
abutters
condition.
were notified, so,
Want to rephrase your motion?
Then I move we accept the application as presented.
second.
Discussion? Hearing none. All in favor? Aye. Opposed? None. Thank you. Thank you, Keith, for your patience.
Thank you. I have a quick question, if you don't mind.
Yes.
I have to get a signature from someone, or?
The town clerk, perhaps?
Yeah, possibly.
Signature, you mean?
Signature?
Yes.
Well, you're getting signatures here.
Oh, okay.
You need more than one.
All right, cool.
You need 6. We'll take care of it for you. Okay.
Good job.
Mr. Town Manager, you want to go back to 8?
I do.
Wonderful. The board will hear a report on the status of the Drought Management Act grant. Are we getting money?
No, and
No.
before we let Steve go, I'm going to say a few words if I can get the screen to cooperate. Ryan, do you want to hit the first bank of lights? I think it went to sleep because we waited too long. But while it's warming up again, we're joined tonight by town engineer Stephen King, who you've already heard from, as well as Kirsten Ryan from Kleinfelder, which is a consulting engineering firm that has supported the town on many projects, but in particular on our grant-funded studies related to the water basin. On August 21st, and it looks like the slideshow has been advanced while you guys are sitting there, but on August 21st, the town is required to respond to the DEP order to complete, which is related to our water withdrawal permit renewal. This is a critical step in the process to obtain our new permit. From there, we would expect to receive a draft permit from the DEP sometime in the winter that will lay out all of the conditions and withdrawal limits. And I think it's a real possibility that the town will end up litigating that permit based on the kinds of questions that we're seeing in the order to complete. And so, you know, the reason for this, from our view, is that despite the good story being told by science and data in the basin, there are some deeply rooted narratives that continue to claim that water withdrawal by water suppliers is having an adverse impact on the watershed. It simply isn't true. And this is in part why we assembled our state delegation representing the North Shore back on June 5th. Chairman Bennett attended that meeting. We filled this room with water suppliers and senators and representatives and their staff from across the North Shore to talk to them about the findings of these studies and what the implications of those findings are. We're under constant pressure to justify every drop of water we take out of the basin, when the fact of the matter is that there is plenty of water in the basin, but current regs prevent us from getting it when we need it in places where it is. Our water use in Danvers, as we know well, recently has declined steadily over the past 20 years. despite the fact that there's more annual precipitation and more water in the basin than ever before. One of the critical findings in our first study, which precipitated this study, was that the suppliers in the Ipswich River watershed collectively are using only 7% of the basin's annual water budget. In other words, all the water that flows through the basin each year. And only 1% is being pulled from ground sources. So the other 6% that we're using is being pulled from surface ponds like our reservoir. So the other 93% of the water in the basin is either flowing out to the ocean or evaporating or being absorbed in the basin. And we know this is a basin that went dry in the 19th century during drought. So the water suppliers are a relatively new phenomenon in terms of the water, in terms of the Ipswich Basin. Despite the facts that we just shared, that the narrative continues to push that regulated and unregulated withdrawals are pushing the basin to the brink of collapse, which simply and clearly is not true. One of the cases in point that I like to share, before Rick Rogers retired, he pointed out to me that there's an environmental advocacy group out of D.C. called the American Rivers Alliance. For the past 34 years, they've issued an Endangered Rivers report. In 2003, on the heels of one of the worst droughts we've seen in a century, the Ipswich River appeared, and it was off that list the next year. So in 34 years, it's appeared exactly once. That was in 2003. Despite this, virtually everybody has continued to refer to this basin as a distressed basin since then, including the DEP. That's a narrative that has taken root, and it's hard to change that perspective once it's established. But the presentation tonight, thankfully, has the benefit of being both a good story and a story based on science and more than 40 years worth of operational data in the Danvers and Middleton water system. And the reason I mention litigation tonight is that if the next permit is more restrictive than our current permit, which we have reason to believe it will be, despite a lack of science or operational data to support further restrictions, the 15% water increase that our water and sewer commissioners voted through this year has the potential to become the norm, which clearly is not sustainable, nor is it justified based on the availability of water today. So, that's sort of where we are. Unfortunately, we have a very good example next door of litigation working very favorably for water suppliers. Beverly Salem has been appealing their permit since the mid-1990s, and they enjoy none of the restrictions that are suffocating our system. So we're going into our permit renewal with an open mind. Some of the data you're going to see tonight is a requirement of that order to complete. We have to do the minimization plan as part of that response. But that's where we are, and on that dire note, I'll turn it over to Steve to share some good news.
Yeah, good evening, board. Again, Steve King, town engineer. The town manager gave a great introduction to basically how this presentation is going to unfold with some of the technical information that came up during the various studies that we performed over the past couple of months with the grant we received from the Massachusetts Department of Environmental Protection. Just to go back and kind of give you a brief introduction of how we got to this point, back in October of last year, I was in front of the board and I presented a brief presentation on long-range water system planning, basically going over some of the scenarios and alternatives that we could look at to possibly gain some more resiliency in our water supply system. Example, raising our dams at Emerson or Middleton Pond, running our wells not just on an alternate day pumping series, but actually on an everyday series, versus what our Water Management Act allows us to do. The long-range system planning was evolved out of the two of the swimming grant projects that we undertook with the DEP. The Phase 1 grant project was the Ipswich River Basin water suppliers got together. We evaluated all our practices and operational procedures. We collected data from the study, and as Steve mentioned before, some of the key elements that came out of that first grant study was that municipal groundwater supplies are really only 1% of the basin water that's used in its entirety. You can see 1% is a small percentage. A vast percentage does go to evapotranspiration.
Steve, excuse me, can you talk a little slower?
Up the mic, yeah.
Sure, yeah. Can you hear me now?
Yes.
I'll go back. So we originally presented to the board last year on October 16th, 2018, long-range water system planning. That came out of our two swimming grant projects, Sustainable Water Management Initiative, that we received grants from the DEP to work on with Kleinfelder and some of the local water suppliers, Beverly, Salem, Linfield, Lynn, Middleton, Hamilton, Wenham, we all got together.
What co-occupies, meaning that they draw from the same water source?
We all draw from the Ipswich River Basin. All the water suppliers within the Ipswich River Basin got together. It's a very, very large watershed. Based on those 2 grant studies, we came up with some key elements and facts that we thought were important to all the water suppliers when they go forth to do their order to completes for the Water Management Acts. One of the findings was that municipal groundwater domestic water use was only 1% of the actual basin budget, which is a very small percentage. And then we also...
Would you please say that again, Steve? I'm trying to understand precisely.
The actual groundwater withdrawals from all the public water suppliers only account for 1% of the actual watershed basin budget.
You're saying that all of the occupiers, including us, use 1% of available resource?
So
of the watershed resource. Yes.
Well,
Groundwater withdrawals only, not surface water.
So we have reservoirs and we have wells across our watershed. And when you look at all of either the rainfall or the groundwater that makes its way into the watershed basin, a total of 7% of that total water is consumed by the water suppliers, providing water to the businesses and residents who live here. And of that, 100% of the total water, only 1% is pulled from the ground from wells. So the rest is collected in the reservoirs. And I think the context that we like to put that in is that there's a narrative that water supply, that when the river goes dry or tributaries on the river go dry, it's a direct correlation to water withdrawals by the water suppliers, and it simply isn't the case. If we were to stop drawing well water tomorrow in its entirety, those tributaries would still go dry. It's a naturally occurring phenomenon, but the narrative has taken hold that it's the water suppliers who caused that, which again simply isn't the case.
Correct. It's basically, it's not 100% of the cause of us withdrawing the groundwater supplies. It's not the reason for the river
And the
going dry.
state scientists disagree with that?
They do disagree with that, yes. But that's the key point that we need to push across when we go to renew our Water Management Act.
To be fair, I don't know that they agree or disagree. I'm not sure that we've gotten a clear indication from them how they feel about that information. That's part of what we'll be discussing with them in this process.
But our dilemma at this point is that we as public entities are fighting several private lobbying organizations that are raising millions of dollars in order to promote their view of the law, of the existence. And in fact, the day after you had your summit, I understand they had a large meeting with all the same representatives and senators to show their side of the issue. And in fact, the Salem News last night or today published a major opinion piece supporting their views.
That opinion piece was based on private wells and private entities, not municipal water suppliers. The way I read that opinion article that came out on Monday.
But the point's taken, Bill. I think that's part of the narrative we're talking about.
The point is, it's not just the Ipswich River Watershed Association. They have the Parker River Watershed Association, the Charles River Watershed Association, and I believe the Blackstone River. There's 4 or 5 different river associations that are all combining their efforts and trying to promulgate legislation or permanent restrictions on people like us who are the consumers. They are the quotation marks good guys in the eyes of certain people, and we are the quotation marks bad guys.
Yeah, they would like to see both sides of the private and municipal owners both have regulations put on place. Right now, only municipal water suppliers have these regulations based on their Water Management Act permits. Private country clubs and private homeowners do not have those same regulations that municipal water suppliers have. So they do want to both, and put more regulations on the public water suppliers and also create new regulations for private well users as well.
So, Steve, what do you want to accomplish tonight? What is the takeaway here?
Just to present we want to present some of the facts from the recent drought management plan grant and some of the optimization projects that we'd like to move forward with in order to create a more resilient operation for our water supplies here in the town. Basically, give you a little background is the data that we've seen. We've had new data based on the last 20 years of rainfall and precipitation that we didn't have before when we did our original 2000 drought management plan. So we obviously want to use that new data, see if there's anything we can do to optimize our wells, our surface water supplies, to gain more redundancy and resiliency out of out of our water supplies. So no further ado, I'll introduce Kirsten Ryan, Hydraulics Senior Project Manager, to run us through the presentation and go over some of the key points that we found during this project.
Thank you, welcome.
Thanks, Steve. Again, I'm Kirsten Ryan with Kleinfelder. We're a consulting engineering firm. I've been working with, folks like Steve, Dave Lane, and the other folks at the DPW and the other water suppliers for the past several years.
Excuse me.
On these projects. Yep.
Kirsten,
Yep.
could you speak up and don't talk quite so fast, because I want to hear
Absolutely.
everything you say.
Yep, I'll do my best. Can you hear me okay now?
Yeah.
Okay. So as we mentioned, this was a grant-funded project this year, kind of building upon, we got grants for the 3 years in a row for Danvers to do this water supply planning work, which is a great accomplishment by the town. This particular study is what I'd like to focus on, because I know time's limited, but this particular study was funded to update the town's drought management plan. So the town prepared a drought management plan in the year 2000, and a lot of years have passed since that was done. So that was one of the tasks that we completed. The other one was what's called a minimization plan. So the drought management plan is not a requirement under the water permit, but this minimization plan is a new requirement under the new permit that's being renewed right now. So I'm going to talk about both briefly in turn, so I'll get into that shortly. So just a little bit of background of what the drought management plan is. I mentioned this was prepared in 2000 originally, and the purpose of it is to best manage your water supplies. It's not about a permit, it's about how do you run your water system so that you're maximizing its use for the needs of the town and trying to avoid purchasing water during droughts. That's really the objective. So in the plan, there's drought stages. So stages are based on two things: the Middleton Pond Reservoir levels and precipitation. So you look at the levels through the year, you look at precipitation through the year, make decisions about how you're going to operate the system. Most people probably experience the drought management plan outcomes in these outdoor water use restrictions. You can see the levels here from that graphic, and we know we're in level 3 right now. So that is actually an outcome of the permit where the stages in the drought management plan are set, and then the Ipswich River flow levels combined with the stages result in triggering these outdoor water use restrictions. So just wanted to explain how those two things are related. The prior drought management plan, again, developed in the year 2000, so it was, the way it was developed, and the company that Kleinfelder acquired, my company SCA, I was there back in 2000 when this project was underway. I didn't actually work on it then, but I'm pleased to be able to work on it now. So that plan in 2000 was based on the prior 20 years of data. And now we have another 20 years since. So, as we mentioned, we have 40 years of data to examine here. We wanted to make sure we looked at the past 18 years of data and see, is this still effective or should it be changed? So we looked at reservoir levels in the past 18 years. We looked at water usage and precipitation. And we really compared those two periods, the 1980 to 1999 period to the most recent 18-year period of data that we had. And really, we boiled this down to fundamentally 3 questions we're trying to answer. Number one, does the most recent 18 to 20 years of data on, our climate, precipitation, and also water use or demand, does that create more stress on the reservoir now than it did in the prior 20 years? Second question, are the drought triggers in the plan, that those triggers are what create changes in how the system's run? Are the ones from the 2000 plan sufficiently protective of the reservoir, or should they be modified? And then lastly, looking into the future, will future demand and climate stress increase stress on the reservoir?
Kristen, the triggers, when you is that what the factors that end up in this color-coded?
No, not quite. The color-coded things are outdoor water use. being more amenable to water exchange. And sorry I'm taking so long, but lastly, I'm almost done. The other task that we undertook that was grant funded was this minimization plan. As I mentioned, this is a requirement of the new Water Management Act. So it was great to have funding to complete that requirement. And it's basically a plan documenting how Danvers plans to minimize impacts on the Ipswich Basin. A lot of it was documenting, some things that have already been completed and understood. But optimizing your existing sources, you could see working hand in hand with this study and the results we presented in October. Your sources are optimized. There's, not much you can do with your reservoirs that you aren't already doing very well. So we also summarized the options for alternative sources and then water conservation measures. And this plan conclusions, as I said, Danvers reservoirs are quite well optimized. Well yields are an important part of maintaining drought resiliency and avoiding purchase of water. To increase your resiliency and source redundancy, that potential new source outside of the basin is one option. Municipal interconnections, conservation, continuing that award-winning conservation plan that you guys have. So that's all I have. Unless there's any questions.
Before the questions, I'd like to add a couple of thoughts. So one of the takeaways here, I think, if the new permit is asking the town to sort of conserve or optimize its way to new lower thresholds, we're not going to be able to do that. We can't continue to sell less water and operate the system effectively. With the recent rate increases again, I think are sort of a case in point in that. Some of the ideas, we do have an agreement with the Danvers Alarm List to do some well testing at the Rebecca Nurse Homestead. That's the North Coastal Basin item that's mentioned there. We know that, we were talking earlier today, when we look at 7% being used versus 93% not necessarily being in the right place at the right time, if we think big, there's a regional solution here. There's plenty of water. I know, we've learned through this multi-year process that we have water suppliers who are hesitant or nervous about going that direction because the experience in this watershed has been that the DEP, essentially, for lack of a better term, you sort of punished for doing the right thing. And I think there's concern that if a community tries to partner or regionalize, rather than being rewarded, things are taken away. And I think a recent example of that, we had a community within this watershed that made a connection to the MWA, and the question was, will those recently freed up water resources within the basin be available for reallocation? And the conclusion was, well, no, because someday they might come back and reconnect, and so we're going to consider those gallons still being used for the purposes of looking at the basin-wide impacts. Those are the kinds of decisions coming from DP that cause suppliers to think long and hard about giving up any of their current rights in order to pursue some ideas that might make a lot of sense in the long run. We will continue to look at the MWRA as a long-term option. As it stands today, they have plenty of water. It's a long way from here, and it's very expensive to put the infrastructure in place to connect to that. We've seen the data bear out that additional surface water retention, whether it be, we know that our reservoirs by themselves don't pay for themselves in terms of how much capacity, but Beverly Salem owns rights to additional reservoirs. Other communities have space where they could establish additional reservoirs. And so if we had a supportive partner at the state to look at capturing more of that water that's falling within the watershed, that's part of the answer. But we have found that the watershed associations do not support projects like that. Army Corps of Engineers may not necessarily support projects like that. So in many ways, we keep running into a wall in trying to think this through. But we have to think it through because we have an obligation to provide water long-term to our customers. So a lot of frustration, but I think we would applaud Kirsten and her team because really sort of the methodical approach to looking at 40 years worth of data to see that what we're doing works, but you can't squeeze more out of a system that's already doing about all that it can in terms of conservation and system optimization.
Thank you. Any questions from members of the board? David?
one question will be, Steve, what, if anything, can the board do to assist you and the team as you continue to struggle with this? And the second question I have, underneath this, under the surface of all of this conflict in policy, fake science coming from Boston, real science coming from us, do you smell the efforts to privatize water and end up with, private people owning the water supply and selling it to towns?
I don't think that there's a sort of conspiracy afoot to privatize water. I think some of the policy direction out of the Capitol has been clear, in terms of low-interest loans and whatnot, to sort of direct suppliers to the MWRA. I mean, there seems to be some interest in that. The point you're making about the science, I think, this is in part based on data and it's in part based on politics. So to answer your question, why are we talking about this tonight? It would be the same reason we asked the legislators to come sit with us on June 5th. We wanted to speak directly to them and share some of what we're seeing and what we're experiencing and let them understand that we have to explain a 15% rate increase to our ratepayers when the majority of that increase is a result of the fact that we're selling 5% less water than we were 5 years ago. And so when your costs go up and your revenues decline, you have to set the rate to cover your cost. So we want, you should see the work that we're doing in terms of responding to the requests, developing a minimization plan. We want to talk about the good work already being done within the system to make sure that we're using our system efficiently. But it's awareness because, as I said, we will get a draft permit sometime this winter, and depending on what's in that permit, we may need to marshal the strength of this board and our state delegation to try to make sure that our voice is heard in terms of what the real impact these decisions have. And it's in particular when the data doesn't necessarily support the decisions that are being made. Harkening back to something that Bill said, I think the suppliers and the advocates clearly, they both have the same goal, and that's to see the long-term sustainability of these water resources. For us, it's the lifeblood of our community. For them, it's natural habitat and recreation, and they also drink the water that comes out of the ground. But we need to be looking at the data and agreeing on what it's saying, and not looking at the data and then working to get decisions made based on narrative. We want to have decisions made based on fact and science. That was a long way of not answering your question, David, but we just want you guys to be aware of what is happening here so that when we come back to continue this conversation later, we have a foundation.
I want us to also be aware that when and if we have to end up going to a court to get what's right for Danvers, it's got to be simple, because the judges don't necessarily, haven't gone to MIT and the engineering schools, so I'm just saying, nice job of explaining it tonight. I understood about 60% of it, but I'm a retired judge, so you don't have to make me happy. The way you have explained it, Steve, to us, to the board, to me, in the last, it always made perfectly good sense, but your explanation is simple. And I know we've got to have scientific graphs and charts and all of that, as people call it, the demographics, right? We have to have demographics to support everything we say. So just saying, as simple as we can keep it, the more luck we will have in the event that we have to end up in a court.
Any questions on this end?
Yeah, this is a topic that absolutely makes me seethe, that certain people do not take scientific facts and make the best of them. We are constrained artificially by constraints of water usage that are absolutely absurd. We have an environment on the North Shore of Massachusetts that I believe is 43, 46 inches per year rainfall, one of the most consistent rainfall rates anywhere in the country. We in Danvers are sitting on one of the best underground aquifers anywhere around. Look at a hydrology map. I'm sure, Kristen, you've seen these all the time. I know I've seen them from the Department of Agriculture, and all the way from where my farm is over to Brooksby Village, and all the way from Route 1 down to the ocean. There's a huge pool of underground water sitting there. I use it. It's all of a total of 8 to 9 feet below the surface. I haven't used a drop of water from the town of Danvers in about 10 or 12 years. Saves a lot of money. It's right there. One of my concerns is the contamination that may be there that's coming forth from Haverhill very recently and has had minuscule amounts in our water system. It's a storage problem, not a supply problem. You showed on your graph with the buffer in the spring, for example, where there's an excess of water that's going out to the ocean. If we can capture that excess of water from January until May and keep it in an additional reservoir, all these facts are predicated upon us using our little tiny Middleton Reservoir with our 2 wells. We own 500 acres. We bought it over 30 years. We spent a lot of money and had a lot of effort to do this, and we've been blackwalled by the state since 1992 on getting that second reservoir. We would be in the same position, I believe, that Salem-Beverly is. They've got Putnamville, and they've got 2 other additional reservoirs. We have Middleton Pond with 2 wells, and Emerson Brook is such, it could be so much more than it is, recreationally and storage capacity-wise. It's a business. If we don't have the product to sell, as Steve has maintained, we have to up the rates. It's ridiculous. We should have almost an unending supply of water to sell to people. MWRA, that seems to be something that's being forced upon us or promoted dramatically upon us. We would be at the very end of the system, us and Marblehead. How much more processing of that water would have to be done to run it all the way from the Quabbin Reservoir to Danvers? I do hear from one of my friends at MWRA that the figure we were quoted about 6 or 8 years ago, I think it was $8 million to connect to the system. Well, they may reconsider that now because they aren't getting the utilization that they had. They have surplus capacity. They want more customers. And I'm sure it's politically astute for certain people to promote that as a source of extra water. Interbasin transfer from North Andover or Andover is another possibility. But I think the greatest possibility has been staring us in the face ever since we purchased the land in Middleton in the 1970s, 80s, and 90s to build another reservoir. I realize it would be expensive, but it would give us the excess capacity that we'd need to serve the system in times of need. I know my father was a town meeting member for 50 years himself, and he used to be frustrated by the water system back then. And he said, damn it, the Ipswich River was bare. You couldn't even go down it sometimes back, it's now 100 years ago. We know that in fact, historically, it's an ebb and flow situation with the Ipswich River, but some people don't recognize that. They like to hyperbolize the dryness of the river a couple of years ago when they put a table out down in Ipswich and had a lunch right in the middle of where the river was because it was totally dry. It's just so frustrating because we need water. Water is the lifeblood of the future of the economy of the North Shore of Massachusetts, of America. We have plenty of water here. It's just to get the bureaucracy out of the way to be able to solve the problem or to address the problem. I don't want to keep going on because it's a dead horse, but it's so frustrating. What I do like this time is, though, we are putting up a fight as a community and as a group of communities that they did not do 10 years ago. And I think it's going to make a big difference, or it hopefully will make a big difference on the legislators if they see that, we are in this kind of a situation and we're not going to take it laying down as they might have 10 years ago.
All set. Thank you. Diane?
Sure. First off, I love your title. I want to be a hydrogeologist someday. First one I've ever met. And don't apologize for taking too long. One thing this town has done is through education and through great data, we've accomplished some great things. Most recently becoming a AAA plus because of the great works over many years. We can't have this go 20 years for this, though, as Bill said. The data has been proven over some time. I look at the water usage, and when I look at 2002 on, all I see is revenue that we've lost by so many restrictions and less use. We just had to do an increase at our water meeting, which residents are going to feel, and yet they can't use as much water. It's the old supply and demand. So I appreciate you taking this time and doing this, and you too, Steve. I know that you have many years of fighting water ahead of you, but we have in this town been successful when we continue to fight. A rail trail, 20 years, which was supposed to be the demise of Danvers, and it's the greatest thing we've done, and our AAA plus is going to allow us to handle a debt. So stay with us. We do get things accomplished, but this cannot go for 20 years. Thank you.
Thank you. Gardner?
I don't have any questions, thank you.
So Steve, Christian, thank you very much for the in-depth presentation. It's a conversation we've been having for a number of years.
Thanks for your time, I
Appreciate the
appreciate
input.
it.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Are we doing number 11, Mr. Town Manager?
Yes, we'll do number 11. I'm sure we've been checkerboarding around tonight. but
That's
we'll-
okay. The board, I'm keeping track. The board will hear an update by Planning Director David Fields, which I don't see.
Yeah.
I'm going to play the role of David
Oh,
Fields
okay.
tonight.
That's why I was asking. Regarding the downtown corridor zoning target dates for remaining tasks before a February 2020 special town meeting.
You putting your bow tie on?
I'm not as smart as David, and I don't wear bow ties. But beside that, I'll do my best. You received a brief memorandum from Aaron Henry tonight. Aaron's away this week, and David was going to be here in his stead. And today I said to David, I think I could handle the update. So he's enjoying a well-deserved night at home. He has a lot of night meetings. But the gist of this memo, we had been eyeing a November town meeting to bring the C1, C1A, and I1 High Street zoning to the town meeting. Aaron and David are both recommending that we stretch that process out a little bit to February to allow for adequate time to really sort of think it through and get it right. A couple of points made in this memo. One, the 40R regulations, our last district, the Maple Street I-1 district, was compliant, or it did qualify under Chapter 40R, Smart Growth, at the state. And the process this time is exactly the same as last time, where the planning board has worked with stakeholders to discuss sort of density, design, and street feel to determine what the recommendation ought to look like, and then compares that to what the 40R regulations are. And indeed, these recommendations would be 40R compliant, so there would be an incentive payment associated with the new zoning if it goes through. So that's one point that's made in here. And I did note that the regulations changed, so it's a slightly different process to get the approvals back from the state. So that's a small factor, but the main reason they're recommending that we slow this down is to make sure that we have adequate time this fall to work through the public hearing process, and then come back after the new year and make the presentations to the various boards and the town meeting members to make sure that they're fully up to speed in terms of what's being proposed. I did provide an updated timeline to you tonight. Aaron's memorandum included a timeline, but we did move some things around in there, and I just thought I would walk through that. So to comply with this process at either our September 17th or October 1st meeting, there would be a presentation made to the selectmen to talk through the 40R process. Starting on October 22nd, and then additionally in the fall as necessary, we would have a series of public workshops. I'll note, Aaron and David and their staff have held 4 workshops already, including some planning board meetings. So they've engaged with most of the property owners and abutters in these districts already, but we want to continue to widen the lens and start to get feedback community-wide. On December 10th, the planning board would open its public hearings under this process. The recommendation today is that we would look to close the warrant on December 20th. We do have a couple of other potential items for this town meeting, which we'll talk about as we get closer to the warrant date, but we would close the warrant on December 20th, and then we would plan to have staff and members of the planning board before the selectmen at our first meeting in 2020 to go through in detail the proposal along with the other items. The January 14th meeting for the planning board would be if needed, so if they do not complete their public hearing in December, they would plan to continue that public hearing to the first meeting in January. And then we have some dates put in here for the Finance Committee review, distribution dates for this for the town meeting members. We'd be looking at a Saturday workshop on February 1st, similar to what we did for the Maple Street I-1 zoning, and then a February 10th special town meeting at the high school at 7:30. And we've confirmed that time and location with the town moderator as well as with the schools. So I'd be happy to try to answer any questions anybody has right now about the process, but that's generally where we are. But I will start to.
Would you plan a snow date?
Not a bad
Which
idea.
item, Dan?
Just to be prepared.
For the 10th, is that what he's saying?
Any questions, anybody?
You mean for the actual?
For the action, because it's.
Town meeting?
Yeah, I mean, at some point, if it's 2 inches of snow, that's fine, but if you get 12,
We'll have the streets cleared.
I'm sure you will. David, any comments? Diane?
No, I'm
Okay,
just
thank you.
waiting to see what he
Go ahead.
says.
I'm good.
Bill?
Comments?
All right, thank you for the updates. We'll look forward to those meetings. Thank you.
So that's a Saturday. Assuming that's-
All right, we're going to go to 13 through 15. Joe, shall I just read them and then call for a motion?
That would be fine.
Okay, great, thank you.
Thank you.
Steve, do you want to make any
Yeah, just a couple of.
remarks first before we go
A couple
forwards?
you received a memorandum from Rodney Conley to Joe and me summarizing the results of our recent bond sale. Very favorable bond sale. Rodney ended with the lead, but buried in the final paragraph, based on where we were in June, and the upgrade to AAA, the town saved roughly $500,000 with this bond issuance, which is really good news. Before we get to the motion, I did include some materials in your packets this week. You have the rating that the Standard & Poor's rating agency gave to the town, and behind that, the materials that were presented to S&P when they came to Danvers on July 22nd. I would just note, Chairman Bennett attended that. We had S&P in town for 4 hours. We split that time evenly between a presentation in our new training center at the police station, as well as a tour of the community. Dan offered the welcoming remarks at our presentation to S&P. He represented this board very well, and S&P actually commented toward the end of the day that it was both unusual and welcome that a select person attended that meeting and participated in that meeting. And Dr. Dana described the school budget as being part of the town budget. We had a full room with staff, and I think S&P left that meeting with a clear understanding that collaboration is a real thing in Danvers, and part of the explanation for the strong reserves and stability over time has been that collaboration. So this is something, Salem News covered it pretty extensively, but this has been years and years and years in the making, and credit to this board and prior boards, and a lot of credit to Wayne and his team for putting the pieces in place. And the analogy I used on the phone with Wayne is that they advanced the ball to the 10-yard line. Travis did a trick play and got it to the 3-yard line, and then Rodney and I just sort of stumbled into the end zone to score the touchdown. But it really is, it's a great accomplishment, and the community should be very proud. And the proof is here in the results from our bond sale this week. So very excited to share this with you.
Well, just my comments. It was an interesting day listening to the folks come and their pushback. I mean, we really made a case, made a presentation. They appreciated the collaboration. They appreciated the fact that, one, we have policies that we've followed, and putting them in writing made a big difference. So kudos to Rodney and his predecessor to get those policies before us and for us to adopt them and putting in writing. And over the years, we have followed those policies, which makes a big difference, and Joe was very instrumental in that. And Steve did not mention the great lunch we had prepared by the senior center.
Thank you, Dan.
Missed it.
And thank you, Dan, for your extra effort in,
No, I enjoyed being there. It was a learning experience, and I can.
very generous of you.
No, it was very good. And I get to point a few things out on the bus when we're driving around too. So. Thank you, Steve, and your staff for the work, and now we'll go on and spend the money. The board is requested to approve the sale of $20,275,000 municipal purpose bonds to Janney Montgomery Scott LLC with a winning bid of 2.35% for the following projects. $20 million Smith School construction, $275,000 fire station repairs and improvements. Can I have a motion?
So moved?
Second. Discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? None. Thank you. The board is requested to approve the sale of $3,295,000 to BNY Mellon Capital Markets with a winning bid of 1.62% for the following projects: 1.6 million sewer I&I, 195,000 Frost Fish Brook drainage improvements, and $1,500,000 water mains. A motion, please.
So moved.
Second.
Discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? None, thank you. The board is requested to approve the sale of $2,600,000 in bond anticipation notes to Piper, Jaffrey and Company with a winning bid of 1.41% for the following projects: $1,600,000 Highland School roof, $300,000 sewer I&I, and $700,000 Frost Fish Brook. Motion, please.
So moved?
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Thank you. Now that we just approved everything, what's I&I?
Infiltration and inflow,
Infiltration and inflow. Thank you.
I believe it is.
Thank you. Okay.
I'll go with that.
Not going to argue.
Smart move.
Thank you. So next, selectmen's new business. Does any selectman have any new business like to bring up at this time?
Yes.
Gardner?
So I had a interesting discussion with a local resident who has some insight into a small business and the way they try to navigate the systems within towns, within the town. And I had actually mentioned this, I think, a while back. I can't remember how many years back, but with the changes in department heads and department personnel, it may have fallen off the radar. So I'd ask to you, Mr. Chairman, for the town manager to consider a pamphlet or a brief guide to, so you want to start a small business in town. You know, steps to getting your businesses off the ground. What, you know, so you might start with getting a business certificate by going to the clerk's office. It might start by, you know, and then it might be followed by, do you need to, you know, what permits do you need if you're building out your, a building, a physical site? You know, you have to go to the planning board. If it's outside of zoning, you'd have to go to the zoning board. Kind of a map, as it were, of what it would take for someone to start a small business in town. My analogy is this: it's town halls like walking into Lowe's or Home Depot and saying, okay, here's everything that's available to you. But if you're saying, I want to build a birdhouse, you don't know which wood to select and which tool to select and which saw to select. Telling me everything's here is great. It allows me to be very flexible. But I'm really trying to say, great, now that I see everything in Home Depot is available to me, how do I build a birdhouse? What wood do I select? What saw do I select? What do I need to do? And then if I have a different project and I'm redoing my kitchen, that's a different path. But if you're going to start a small business in town, it might be nice to have either a guide or a pamphlet, or at least identify a point person in the economic development department or someone they can go to that could walk them through the steps and that they don't stumble, falter, or kind of get lost in the fact that we have so many departments and so many rules and so many regulations, and they just may not know. So maybe that's already on someone's docket.
So we do have, it is somewhat built out on the website, and we have an email address set up that directs everything to David Fields, who is our Director of Economic Development. And we are discussing the notion that, you know, sometimes economic development sort of starts inadvertently through a question to the clerk's office or a phone call to the electric division or a pop-in to code. So with Aaron and David in place for the better part of the past year, so we have a pretty good funnel through the website, but that remains a work in progress, and the feedback's well taken, because I think we agree. You know, our goal is to get to a point where everybody knows the first call you make is to David Fields upstairs in the Economic Development Office, and whether it's a pamphlet or making sure that he's the point person for these things, so that they can get the information they need quickly the first time.
And may I just make a comment?
Yes, please.
I haven't been a lawyer for 20 years, but when I was a lawyer, I sometimes represented businesses that wanted to do some kind of a project in Danvers, a little bit larger than just a homeowner, you know. But I learned after a couple of years to simply ask, at that time, Mark Reagan, and then Karen Nelson, whoever was kind of the coordinator of the planning department, could the proponents please come in and have a talk with you and give you an idea of what they wanted to do, and then would you feedback? It was very, very helpful. It's always started things off on the right foot. Proponents felt really good about that. I think that the departments were really happy to be pre-requested, and things went really smooth. So I suspect that probably is something that's available now.
Yeah, you're describing, we have both a formal and an informal technical review committee. And so we do a great job with the big projects. When there's a big project to be, that's in the pipeline, we try to get the applicant at an informal session with planning and code and fire and engineering to make sure that if there's feedback we can give them early in that process, they get it and it can be incorporated into what they ultimately put forward in application. I think Gardner's probably described there's another part of the market there, the smaller business, the individuals who are looking to do something, and I think we could do a better job there. Like I said, I think we've done a great job historically with the big projects, and we want to be able to address the big projects and the little projects equally well.
And don't perceive it as a complaint. Mm-hmm. It was more of here's an opportunity they saw. Mm-hmm. For example, if someone says, I want to open this kind of business, dog grooming business, yeah, you can say, go look in the zoning. But unless you know the vernacular, unless you know that pet grooming instead of dog grooming, and you try to search, it's difficult to identify, and you may not realize that subsection 42 amends this other subsection that, so you can do it in this zoning, but then you have to go through the zoning graph and try to figure it out and those kind of things.
If anybody's being told, go look in zoning, I'd like to know about that, because I'm pretty sure that's
an example.
Not
that was
how
an
it goes.
example.
When you end up in front of one of our staff, you get pretty good service, but I think it's a complicated process.
Yeah.
And that's the point I think we want to.
And I do want to say for the small, when I had to change something, I went to the clerk because I'm pretty strict about my business certificate when I finally pay it. And they right away, I didn't have to call Joe or anybody. Right away, you have to go see Rich. I went to Rich. He checks zoning as to whether I could do it. He signs off, and then you go back. So for the smaller ones like me, they do, the clerks here pretty much know the process, and Rich knows his zoning. So, it was a pretty easy step.
It's kind of a combination roadmap, frequently asked questions. Yep. Is my business allowed in my home? Yeah. Can I do dog grooming here?
Yeah, well, business certificate, if you start with what you're supposed to in business certificate, they will direct you to and then if you're not in zoning, then you can go upstairs, but that's all. But that was just, for the smaller people like me, they were pretty good, and Rich came right out and said, yeah, you can, and that was it.
So I think your point is well taken. The small businesses might need a little place to start with.
Where to start, yeah.
Get some
That's the big thing.
direction.
Yeah,
So great.
I'll take that feedback back and we'll report back.
Thank you. Okay, anybody else with any new business?
Not new.
I had a second item, sorry.
Well, let me give everybody else an opportunity. Everybody's all set? All right, Gardner.
So, in the selectmen 13 years, and someone asked me a question that it kind of really stumped me, and don't know that I should have been stumping out, but we have boards and commissions. We have the planning board, we have the zoning board of appeals, we have others that make decisions, binding decisions. This person asked, what if they simply disagree with, and I'm going to pull one out of the ZBA. They go to the ZBA, they request something, the ZBA asks them questions, they make their, the decision, but they simply disagree with the ZBA. What is do they have an appeal process? We heard someone here who, wanted to do something with traffic. Well, if the traffic advisory denies something, is there an appeal process? Does it come to the selectmen for us to consider? Because on one hand, I wanted to give this person a path of resolution, but the other is we empower ZBA and the planning board and other boards and commissions to do their job because they become the microcosm experts in those things. I wouldn't know the zoning
Can I
regulations.
offer a comment?
Yeah.
When I was on the ZBA for 2 years, I was part of a lawsuit 8 times from people that didn't like the zoning board's decision. That is their recourse.
So the right to repeal is just legal?
Well, I think and it depends on the committee. You mentioned DTAC, which is a creature of the selectmen. So if an applicant went to DTAC and wasn't satisfied with the recommendation from DTAC, which would be coming to the board anyway, so that appeal would
And
probably
that's
happen in
right.
real time when the recommendation was being made. But
And
with
that's
the
why I
regular,
suggested to Peter that he come before him, that's the next step,
Right.
because the DTAC is under us.
Yep.
So it depends on the board, and who has legislative or judicial authority.
So,
Zoning board is quasi.
so for those judicial ones, when they make a recommendation, I guess that the question was, and this person was not hearing that they had recourse to go the legal route. And some people are just reluctant to go the legal route, too.
Well,
so.
for the ZBA, they have an attorney more than likely.
Yeah, or if you're on the opposite side.
Yeah.
Yeah. So they were just looking for what their opportunities of recourse was if they disagree with the ruling of a quasi-judicial or, regulatory board we have here. I'll go back and guide them that it's a catch as catch can. We'll have to figure out, depends on which one it is.
Depends on which one it is, exactly, right.
not knowing any of the context, my suggestion would be the person ought to go and have a conversation with Rich Maloney in Inspectional Services, and he'd be happy to explain what the process is.
Okay, it was general. It wasn't, they didn't have they weren't appealing something that a decision they actually had. They just wanted to know what the appeal process would be.
Okay.
Thank you. All set.
Okay, we're all set? Mr. Town Manager?
Couple of updates for you. I provided you with a copy of a letter that the town submitted in response to a complaint that was filed by Mark Zubrick with the Department of Public Utilities. You'll probably recall during the town meeting process in 2018, Mr. Zubrick came before the Light Board, the Selectmen, the Finance Committee, and town meeting with a number of concerns. Those bodies did not share his concerns, and he decided to submit those concerns to the state in the form of a formal complaint. For whatever reason, the DPU decided to listen to that complaint this summer, so we received notice in the summer that we had to respond to the complaint by Mr. Zubrick by early August, which we did. You received a 9-page letter which had many attachments to it to respond point by point to the complaints that Mr. Zubrick has levied more than once with the town. This took up a tremendous amount of time this summer. It also cost the town, between staff time and legal fees, the town and the electric division expended north of $15,000 responding to this complaint. We think that it's baseless. Frankly, we think it's frivolous. And you were provided a copy of that so you could see, again, because I suspect that we'll continue to talk about these issues, but you'll see the town's response to the complaint that was filed last week. So that's one of my updates.
What's the next step in the process now that you've responded?
So the DPU has received Mr. Zubrick's complaint. It will review the town's response, and it has the opportunity at that point to simply close it down and respond by saying that the town is in compliant with Chapter 164, Sections 56, 58, and 63. They may decide to bring in all of the involved parties and have them be on record at a hearing, which would incur additional costs if that's a decision that they make. But at some point, probably within the next month or so, we will hear either way from the DPU, and we'll act accordingly.
I don't mind a resident disagreeing with us. We've all dealt with this, but I didn't like that we were told we ignored something. We were within law. I really didn't like being told I misappropriated funds. It's probably not good for me to be accused of misappropriating funds. We have the case law, as Steve provided, that says that what we did was legal, or actually prior to us. I'm not even sure that the petition names, I actually know that a couple did not know that their name was being forwarded to the DPU. had conversation. I read that thing front to back, very angry. And what really upset me is, again, the little pet peeve I have, that interest is an expenditure I hate in this town. And by doing what we did, we saved people from being charged more for water to pay interest. Good job, whoever was the final signature to that. That's what the residents ask us to do. This isn't the only thing that he has questioned us on. I'm not attacking him, but I'm getting a little tired of it. And that's only what we've paid for this one incident. So I think we need to get through this, and I don't, you know, somebody coming here and telling me they're saving us money, and in each incident it's costing us $10,000 or so dollars. I don't know how somebody can come and tell me that I'm the one who's misappropriating funds. So I needed to voice my opinion on this. I don't ignore people. I think I'm pretty good at stating my opinion, whether you like it or not. And to have somebody say that all these boards ignored them, well, all these boards were reading the same thing I was, that what we did was legal. I have never seen this board hide just because they didn't want, you know, to have somebody accusing them. If it wasn't illegal, I'm sure one of us would have said, no way. And I think that we've been pretty good about that. So that really felt good. But I'm really getting, you know, I don't agree that somebody, you know, first off, I don't even believe that some of the names he submitted, and I know that. I asked them to send a letter in to DPU. I don't even believe that half those people knew their name was forwarded, so.
Thank you. Anything else, Steve?
Just a couple other quick updates. You received a memo from David Lane tonight on a couple of, actually 2 separate memos on a couple of the projects that are currently going on. The first one, Smith School, is there's not much to say here. If you've been by the school this summer, you've seen that the site work is well underway. You know, they've stripped the loam from the foundation for the new school. They've roughed out where the new parking will be. They've set up the contractor space. The utilities have been relocated, and so that project is well underway. We've been getting prompt reimbursements from the MSBA for all of the expenses incurred to date. Very brief, you know, you can see we're only about 4% of the way through the budget, so much more to come. That number will start rising quickly once the trades are all on site. But the project is moving right along. And the Highland School roof, this is a project that has been a bit challenging. You recall last year we had a roof company up give us a quote for $1.6 million to do the roof. MSBA approved the project through their accelerated repair program. They started pulling the roof apart and found much more extensive damage. We were able to get the MSBA to approve to participate in a larger project prior to town meeting. Town meeting supported increasing the budget to $3.2 million. I'll start by noting on the back of that memo related to Highlands, the good news here is that the bids came in pretty competitively. So some of the savings on the construction project have been sort of identified on paper as an increase to the contingency, but you know, as it stands today, we're about $330,000 below budget, and we have you know, close to $500,000 in contingency on the project, both of which are strong places to be. Did circulate an email a week or two ago. There's a request that came in to allow some of that work this summer while school is out to begin at 5:30 inside the building. The chairman and I discussed that, and we're okay with that. Rich and the chief are okay with that. We've communicated with the neighbors to make sure that folks know that if the noise is an issue that early in the morning, then we'll shut it down. But the goal for getting the extra hour and a half of work in each day while school is out is that it's going to minimize the disruption once school starts and the kids are back in the building. The project won't be complete at the start of school, but most of the disruptive work will be done ahead of time as a result of that. And then briefly, 7 Canal Street is not necessarily on the way to anywhere, but if you do drive to the end of that street, you'll see that work is underway. The footings are in, and the foundations will be done next week. And the prefabricated building design is nearly complete. So that project is, I'm going to say, ahead of schedule. but it's ahead of a revised schedule, since we're several years down that road. But about 10 months from beginning to end, and the budget is looking pretty good so far. And the last update I would provide tonight, really just sort of a note. We've talked a lot about the work that we're doing with staff to redesign and make plan design changes to the healthcare, looking ahead to July 1st of next year. We have a couple of sort of final plan design options that are being reviewed right now by each of the 7 unions, the teachers, and we've had a couple presentations in this room for the non-union staff to look at sort of the options that we've sort of honed in on. But as part of this process, we've also decided we're going to be returning to Maya. Maya provided healthcare or health insurance for the town for many, many years. Danvers was one of the founding members of Maya, which is the Massachusetts Interlocal Insurance Association. They've continued to provide property casualty insurance for the town. We left them in 2011 for a number of reasons, but in recent years they've developed a back office function that is really key for towns and cities. And that is that they can seamlessly move retirees who are on the town's active health plan onto Medicare. It sounds like a very simple process, but it's a very complex process. It involves payments coming from the federal government to the retiree, being handed to the town and then handed back to a carrier. And so as you can imagine, we have roughly 65 retirees who fall into this category. They live in places like Florida and Arizona, and so in order to migrate them to Medicare and trying to navigate checks being mailed cross-country and back and forth we would have had to quadruple the staff in our HR department. Maya recognized that need, and they hired the staff and developed a program for that. The result of that is going to be about $700,000 to $1 million worth of claims will come out of the town's health experience and be shifted to the federal government. Thank you, federal government. But it ends up being better. From the retirees' perspective, it's less expensive, and in many ways it's better care. But for both the active employees and the retirees and the taxpayers, it ends up that all of that experience comes out of the healthcare trend, which is a really important thing for us moving forward. So I think that's good news. The unions are very excited about, the ones we've spoken to. Everybody has a positive memory of working with Maya in the past. So we'll be moving back to Maya for next year. That's all that I have.
Thank you, thank you. Can we have a motion on the consent calendar?
So moved.
Second.
Discussion, all in favor?
Aye.
Aye, thank you. Correspondence, previous new business updates. I'm just going to make note that we received a letter today from Tracy Wadsworth, our airport representative. She's moving, so she has to resign effective the end of this month. Steve, if you could prepare a letter for my signature, thanking her for her service, her diligence, and wish her good luck in her future endeavors. And will you advertise for a replacement?
Yes.
Okay, very good.
She was fantastic.
She was. She did a great job.
I really enjoyed her
Yep.
update.
Yep.
She and I communicated, just to let you know, that she has actually petitioned the city of Beverly, the mayor, she's moving to Hamilton. So she's petitioned the mayor with the airport commission's support for a regional representative.
Oh, nice.
She'd like to continue on in a volunteer capacity. She really liked the work.
She was really good.
Great. All right, that's all I have. David, your turn to.
Nothing, David.
Diane?
Yeah, so I want to go to new business that came in today. I have a couple of things. Just to talk to the board, the 62 and 35, that was Peter
Kushner.
Yep. So I was on that committee, as Steve had appointed me when there was problems there. Originally sat with Dot, and we actually got some signage and some paintings and a bit done. They were good to work with. Ted Speliotis and a few of us thought, I still feel that you got to open Liberty Street back up and shut down that ramp. I'll believe it till, think it was the biggest mistake. Not sure what he's talking about with that left turn arrow. I'll have to pay it. I never take a left, so I haven't really paid attention.
If I may,
to
you
that.
come off the ramp or coming up.
No, I know what he means. I
right.
just don't know if it's a problem.
The traffic flows through. There is no
Yeah.
dedicated left there, and you're sitting in that lane, and the traffic
Yeah.
is coming against you.
No.
Was there before?
I have to say, I still believe, so if we go back to sitting, I'd love to go back on that again. I really enjoyed, David Lane was great during that time too, and Steve came to those meetings. We actually got a lot done during those meetings, and I'm not sure we don't need to revisit that, but that's just, I just wanted to refresh everybody that opening up Liberty Street, I still think, and shutting down that one ramp, I still believe that. I will always believe that that was the only, I think that would be a huge fix. So I'm sure the neighbors love having, he said the wall's bad. Those neighbors love not having any traffic go through, but I think that has to be done. The next one was Richie Rowell coming in. I loved that. Just a great thing as we work on our waterfront that we still have some lobster and fishermen and women, and certainly I would love to get involved in that. I think that true people in that profession do take the cleanliness very seriously. We have the Bartletts that, have always taken us. We have them around, but if you know where the Rowells live, and I almost think he might have been born there, because I remember those boys always being there and always out on the boats. He literally has no land. I don't even know, except for their little patch in the front, they have no land, but they've kept that property beautiful. They have the dock, and that's his profession, always has been. His son also did it. So I really would love to see us do something good for our fishing professionals. Jane Fuller, I had been to her house when I first became a selectman. She had me over. If I remember correctly, there was nothing we could do because it was a state, but Mr. Chairman, I'm going to leave that one for you, because I remember going through this whole thing and finding out that it was the DEP and it wasn't us that was holding that back. So, and the last is the hardest for me. It's John Morosic. Seeing his kids, Joe, Kerry, and Lisa. Unfortunately, it was really good to see them. It's been since Little League that I've seen them. John was my vice president when I was president of the Little League. I took over after Ben Keenan, and he didn't want to be president because he wanted to coach, and that was one of the rules. I believe John was a catcher. John didn't really care if you won. He only cared that kids learned to love it as much as he did. And he's that kind of coach that when a kid who could never catch a ball catches a ball out in right field, he actually smiled. And if you know John, that doesn't happen too much. It was just the way he was. Baseball was everything to him. His kids were his life. I wish I had 1/10 the intelligence of any of his kids. They are all as brilliant as he is and his wife, Jean. So I think Danvers lost a great guy. In talking to Jean, she said, I said, I thought he was getting better. And she said, he really shouldn't have gone to the meetings he went to at the end, FinCom and the town meeting, but he insisted on going. He absolutely loved being a volunteer for this town. And I wish his family the best.
Thank you, Diane.
Yep. That's it for me. That's enough from me.
Thank you, Diane, for bringing up John's history in town. Bill?
And I'm really happy, Diane, that you had that opportunity, because as I usually commented on the people who've passed, and we had a terrible last 2 weeks with this town. But before I pursue that, I want to, number one, I want to thank Dan for representing us at that meeting with Standard & Poor's. Steve, I want to thank you, and I want to thank the financial people in town. We've been working on this for a long, long time, and it gave me a great deal of gratification to go to the Marblehead Farmers Market on Saturday and be able to rub it into them that we got our AAA as well. In fact, they're going to give me a T-shirt that has AAA Clark on it, I guess. It's kind of fun. On a similar note, I didn't realize last Thursday, I know that we had a tremendous storm right here in Danvers with the rain, but Marblehead got clobbered. And one of the people from Marblehead was thank me to tell people in Danvers, thank you very much for the mutual aid that our electric light gave them. They had, I think, 5 or 7 other municipal electric lights down there, and they had 610 calls to 911 in a 3-hour period in Marblehead, and they were devastated in parts of that town. I went down Thursday night and looked at Fort Sewell and some other places that I'm very fond of, and they got hammered. There were wires down on the road still by the fire station on Saturday morning when I went to the farmer's market. The Verizon and Comcast wires had not been all repaired, but they said that the Danvers and North Reading and Middleton and Peabody and Ipswich Electric Lights really did a great job helping them. And this mutual aid, we all are aware of the fire department's mutual aid. We're not always aware of the other mutual aids that can be provided as we've done in the past, and this electric light mutual aid was fantastic. On the sad note, and one other thing, John was a commissioner of electric light. I had the privilege my last year of teaching of having his daughter Lisa in class, and she was one of the smartest kids I ever had. Really, really smart girl. We had 3 other people who were very prominent in our community who we lost in the last 2 weeks. Bill Nagel, a former electrical inspector, a very dedicated man. I had his son in school, but I also dealt with Bill when I built my barn, and he came in and had to tell me I had to correct 36 outlets that I had wired in the barn incorrectly. He was a great guy. One of my very good friends, Dr. Reverend Charles Gross, who was a stalwart and community member, a member of the Danvers Community Council, besides being the minister of the Maple Street Church for many, many years. A great, compassionate person. Regrettably was found, had passed away in his neighbor's pool last week, and I was just amazed at how little publicity or press it got other than some coverage that a person's body had been found in a pool. Chuck was a great, great guy and helped an awful lot of people in this community. And finally, my former primary care physician, Dr. Bob Collard, who was became the director of emergency services at the Hahn Hospital, a great neighbor, a good friend, and then for many, many years he was on the Board of Health here in town. All 4 of those gentlemen passed away in the last 2 weeks. They made tremendous impacts in our community, and they're going to be missed sorely. Thank you for the time.
Thank you. Gardner?
I have nothing, thank you.
Thank you. Well, at this time, before we close, I'd like people to thank veterans for their service, former veterans and current. And can we have a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
Second?
Second.
All those in favor? Aye. Good night, Danvers. Thank you.